Well, welcome to another episode of the On Patrol podcast. I'm Windhurst Production, joined with my co-host,
Fighting Kentuckian.
and this is episode 24. Can't believe we've made it this far, but we have a great episode for you. I think we'll be introducing a lot of people to a new concept. But before we get into that, we always like to knock off our alibis, caveats, and piggybacks. Just stuff from last episode. So the big one for me is we had technical difficulties with our podcast hosting site. We had some audio issues. That was on my end. I'm still trying to figure out in the recording. And then some people have let us know that the episodes aren't showing on all the podcast sites. Specifically, Apple Podcasts seems to be lagging behind. I'm still working with Podbean. They're suggesting it might be an Apple Podcast problem and not a them problem. So if you typically listen to us on Apple and we're not there right now, we are working on it. Hopefully we'll get it back up. But there are other places you can listen to us in the meantime. Ideally, we'd like to be on whatever service you prefer to listen, just for your convenience. But those are the big caveats from last episode for me. Kentuckian, what do you have?
No, it was a great discussion about modern rule sets, and I really enjoyed it. And it was a lot of great comments from people that we talked about with, highlighting the different rule sets that we did and kind of the flip through. It wasn't a walkthrough, it wasn't a side-by-side comparison, but it was kind of a flip through of nuances and, how does modern wargaming look like on the tabletop. And we got some comments from Bruce there in North Carolina about the drones, and I thought they were very, go to the YouTube if you haven't read that comment. I thought Bruce did a good job of talking about, like, hey, does the drone fight happen before, soldiers are on the ground? How does that equate to the tabletop? And, the way that he had played it or the way that he had seen it done, and similar to kind of other sets of, like, almost like a recon fight prior to. And I don't really know. It depends on what the person is going for in the modern aspect of wargaming. But I think, the way that I've wargamed modern, and I would include Northag and some of the Team Yankee stuff, like Cold War Gone Hot, as there, but not quite, because the technology is still, budding up around that time, right? The Abrams is great, but the T-72s, T-55s are a little bit plus World War II tanks. And so in modern, I've kept it to very small scale, so I haven't had to contend with the drones at that level. And depending on the operational strategic, I would hate to see, I don't know, I think it could go down different avenues, and especially with drones, in the hundreds of thousands being used. I've seen a bunch of different open source stats for Ukraine and seen other reports in other places, and you do have to just capture that on the tabletop. But what does that look like? And then how would you do it with ISR? And to some degree, I think, again, I wrote a comment back to Bruce, but it deleted before I could hit send for most of it. But the idea is like ISR to me is you can see the whole tabletop almost, immediately. And so how do you do ambushes and hidden figure movements kind of like that? I think there could be some creativity to that. But I've played in a few games, whether they be house ruled, where drones seem to be like fog of war stuff. And the idea is that, yes, they're being used at the strategic and higher echelon operational level, but they didn't matter too much. And as we've seen, as the television, and videos come out in Ukraine where they're chasing somebody around a BMP, they're at that individual level. I think it's a great conversation starter about how, AI drones are used in combat for that modern wargaming. And I don't know if anybody has successfully really pulled it off, and especially the sets that I've seen. And I think that would be, it's what kind of game do you want to play, and is it scenario based, or is it, we're bringing everything? Are you the tip of the spear that has two gray eagles floating ahead of you, as well as, dozens of other drones from like the Grasshopper to anything else? It spurred a lot of thought in my own head about how I would make that look well on the tabletop, and I think I'd be very curious, to see what other listeners, because Bruce, I think, had some great comments on that. Other alibis, caveats, and piggybacks. As you can see, Windhurst is living outside under a bridge right now because he's moved all. So yeah, we're all getting ready for the transition, and that'll probably kill some of our hobby time. But we've kind of got stuff forward, and I'll preface that right now as far as over the summer months to get some interviews, game reviews, and rules reviews in, even though we're going to be gypsies and vagabonds and living off the land to some degree over that. So we look forward to you kind of everyone, listener, viewer, staying with us and just enjoying that ride of a great summer transition while continuing to knock out games and hobby time. But I am super excited to kind of record this episode today. I think Windhurst has lined us up with these people and has been a spot-on person that's experienced what we're about to talk about from the the United States perspective, where we don't really go into that. And so our episode today is going to be with Andy and Derek from Big Battles. And to the listener or viewer, what is Big Battles? Have you heard of that? If you've listened to any wargaming podcast or talk to people from Europe and England, you'll have heard about Mark Freeth and the War Games Holiday Center. You'll have heard about these places where they rent venues and they rent sometimes the minis and the tables and the terrains to play on, and that's all they are. This is not your traditional game store. And me and Windhurst kind of talked about this for several months about, wow, it is just such a neat and nuanced and niche kind of topic, and we just don't see it in the States. And we have some comments on why we don't see it in the States kind of later in the interview, but we wanted to give a kind of an inside the look for especially our listeners that are in the States about how do these things run, how do they start, and how do they stay profitable or keep going, whether they're profitable or not, right? And so we look forward to the discussion today with Andy and Derek, and I think it's really going to be a great one. And as Windhurst can tell you, just to experience it, his pictures tell the tale. So check out his site again, his Facebook page, and look at some of those Gettysburg or World War II early stuff. It's amazing. So without further ado, we appreciate you being here as a listener or viewer, and we hope that you grab your spear, your shield, your musket, or your belt-fed machine gun and join us on this episode of On Patrol. And don't worry, you hear a lot of people to your left and right because this is about to be a big battle. We're going to talk big battles and wargaming venues with 24-foot tables. Get ready, get lined out, get your dice ready, and join us on this episode of On Patrol. So let's move out.
Well, welcome everybody. We're so excited to have Derek and Andy with Big Battles with us today. And so as we like to do with these interviews, first we want to introduce Derek and Andy and get to know them a little bit, and then we'll get into what Big Battles is in the second half. So first, either of you who wants to answer first for this question, but how did you start in the hobby? Like when did it start, and how did you come into it?
Shall I go first, Andy?
Yeah, go on.
So,
you're old.
Yeah, as I'm the old one. I started in must have been mid-70s with Airfix. So not only the kits, but they also did the War Games rules. So that was really my first experience of proper gaming with dice rather than lumps of rock and lost figures and that in the garden. So yeah, that was my first kind of real experiences into gaming proper.
Okay, nice.
Long time ago.
What about you, Andy?
I guess mine was a little bit later than Derek's. Mine was probably around 78, 79, and it wasn't so much war gaming, it was Dungeons and Dragons. So that was my route into gaming, and I played Dungeons and Dragons when I was in the army for a couple of years, but much like Derek's alluded to there, I think there was something latent there all the time, because much like a lot of kids here in the UK, I collected Airfix 1/48 plastic figures. I have them still in a bag in the garage, and I keep looking at them thinking, wow, this is what started it really. Like Derek, put them in the garden, throw rocks at them to knock them over, or roll marbles at them. And that's the normal thing for kids here in the UK. Start with the Airfix boxes. And one of the things that always makes me smile is my mum and dad used to buy me a box of soldiers every time I went to hospital. So
you're out there faking injuries to get more. I need to get the new Waterloo set. Come here, somebody push me down.
So I had a problem with my nose, and I had to have it cauterized several times. So every time I went to hospital, I got a new box of soldiers. It was great.
That's perfect.
But yeah, so I'm a bit like Derek. We started as a kid. There was something there in the background always. But 78, 79, I literally was sitting in my bed and some random guy in the army came up and he said, "You're reading a fantasy book, put it down, get in the car with me, we're off to my mate's house." And that's when I first introduced you to Dungeons and Dragons, and the rest is history, as they say.
Nice.
Perfect.
Yeah.
You guys have answered, kind of our first question. And I'll just check with Windhurst right now. Like, any issue with the recording or being able to capture this or anything based on our movement?
Everything seems to be going fine.
go.
Yep.
And my accent's okay?
Well, yeah, it's perfect. I can hear you. I speak hillbilly, or as I like to say, the King's Old English as well. So, yeah. No, so
Good job it's not written down then.
Yeah, exactly. I'm ESL. I'm English as a second language as well. So you guys kind of mentioned on our second question is kind of what game or thing brought you into the hobby, and so Airfix is, I know, especially for you Englanders, and that island over there, Airfix is huge. It was huge here. That's how my dad got me into it. Rob had talked about coming from it, from the fantasy aspect, and then seeing the figures as well. So it's very similar. It's a shame. I think Airfix, I don't know if it's still like the entry drug that it used to be into the hobby, and I don't think it is. But man, such a wonderful time with getting that in modelers, and people branch out from that. But a wonderful time. I'm going to skip down to the third question with you guys kind of answering that, and so wanting to say, who was the most influential person kind of in your early hobby, and what we've seen is, whether it be a parent or you go down to the local club, and somebody just guides you and takes you and Sherpas you, like, hey, play with my models, but they get you kind of hooked. And then you're like, I want to come up with a unit. I want to do that. Or they just help you with the rules. They're always fun to play with. They're not a rules lawyer. And they're just all about kind of getting more people into the hobby. And so, based on your times, we're talking in the 70s here, some would call the golden age, right? Maybe, but it's still golden. But who was that person that was, influential in your hobby growth and development early on?
Go on, I'll carry on first, Andy.
Yeah.
For me, I came across a lad in the next village who actually had a war games table in his house, in his bedroom. And I was completely blown away. I was no longer scrabbling on the floor. I was actually playing on a proper table with plastic trees and hills and things, and metal figures, minifigs. I mean, but we were playing Napoleonic, so it was great. And then, of course, I would get my own collections, and then we'd play battles. And then that led, I guess, into going to my first club, which was at Worcester. And that was a whole different experience, because they're all different periods were played, fantasy, sci-fi, mainly historical. But then, it was introduced me to a whole gamut of different games, whole different group of people. And still fantastic times, fantastic memories, learned a lot about different gaming aspects. So it was good times.
Do you stay in touch with that kid from way back when?
Yeah. Oh yeah. He's now just hit 60, and I'm still painting some figures for him at the moment.
That's nice.
Good. That's why he kept you around. He's like, that guy does good with base coats. I need to bring him over to my house.
Yeah, that's it. You got it. No, it was great times. Great times.
How about you, Andy?
Perfect. What about
For me, there's no one person really, because for the first 7 or 8 years, I really was just playing Dungeons and Dragons, but it wasn't really. I was in the early 80s. I was in the forces at the time, and it just sort of took a few years. And then when I got posted into Germany, when I was in the army, I went to a club, much like Derek mentioned, and obviously there was a group of guys playing Dungeons and Dragons, got into that. But much like any club, what you've got is lots of other games going on, from modern warfare, World War II, sci-fi, fantasy, and I actually got hooked on one of my passions, which is Napoleonics, 15mm Napoleonics. We played that to the point where we'd grab a minibus from Germany and drive to France, Paris, for a competition. Or to the UK. It was great. have minibus, put the box of figures in, put the stack of cases of beer in, and drive to Paris and play, Newbury Fast Play or Sound of the Guns rules for 15mm Napoleonics. And sort of, when I was playing the D&D, it was like, oh, this Napoleonic thing is quite good fun. And that's what I sort of, I guess, started collecting figures because some very, very kind person, his name was Andy, I can't remember his second name, was Andy. He was quite influential because he said, I'm bored pointing British and French for Waterloo. Do you want anything painted? Me not being a great painter, I went, oh, okay, what do you fancy painting? He goes, anything that's not red or blue. I said, how about Saxon white? And he went, okay, buy me the core then. I went, sorry?
Oh, wow.
He went, buy me the core that went into Russia and I'll paint it.
Wow.
And I literally bought the whole core of Saxon's 7th Corps, Vasely's Corps that went into Russia, and all from minifigs. So he was substituting the French figures in for the Saxon and all that. And he dutifully painted me every single cavalry regiment, every single battalion, every gun, every battalion gun, all the ADCs and generals. And it was sort of, yeah, this is good fun. And playing with them and using them, that sort of hooked me then, as well as playing Dungeons and Dragons, into the historicals and fantasy gaming, because we started to play Napoleonics a lot of Napoleonics, but we also started playing BattleTech. That had just come out around 89, something like that. I can't remember the exact date, but it was very new, and I remember spending a lot of money on a BattleTech Lance. And even today, it's one of our, Derek and I both love playing BattleTech. And we play it on the big tables at big battles and everything. And we don't play in a little 2-foot square. We play across 16, 20 foot of table space and stuff like that. And that's where I sort of got a number of people who said, play some Modern Warfare, play some World War II, play a lot of Napoleonics. And those people in the club, of which one of them turned out to be my best man, and I'm still in contact with, and believe it or not, we still play Dungeons and Dragons every few months. So that's like 30, 40 years ago, which is quite remarkable.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah. So that's sort of the influential people, I got to say. That club in Gütersloh in Germany, the people of that club were my main influences into gaming, because they allowed me to play my passion of Dungeons and Dragons, but also branch out into all the historical and fantasy and sci-fi games available.
That's awesome. Paint a whole core too. Wow, that's awesome.
Do you still have it?
You know what? I had that core until about 10 years ago, and I only sold it because the only thing he did, which was amazing, was he based it on his own set of rules. So all the figures were based on their own set of rules, and the base frontage was massive. And he used plasticard with arrowdite, and you just couldn't take the figures off. So sadly, I did sell it at some point. Somebody else is using it now, but it was quite special getting the Garde du Corps, the Zastra, and all the Hussars, Chevalier, and all that. It was impressive to put on the table.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll roll into the next one. So you guys mentioned a couple of different rules there. What's your favorite? Now, as Kentuckian always likes to say, we never have a favorite kid. You're not supposed to. So you can have a couple of favorites, or if you want to have any honorable mentions. But if you had to pick, gun to your head, had to pick your favorite rules or favorite top 2 or 3, what do you think it would be?
Oh,
well, you're leading, Derek. You may as well. There's going to be similarities here. I know this.
I know. I mean, it's. You're right. It is like picking your favourite child, but I guess the way I would gauge this is what rules do I take on holiday with me to read and to just totally soak up. I mean, for me, I love the new Northag rules by Battle Group and their World War II versions.
Yep,
great sets.
Warwick is awesome.
Yeah. Kings of War for fantasy, I think, is a cracking set of rules. That filled a real gap when GW killed off Warhammer Fantasy. And and BattleTech, although I don't ever take a copy with me, it's just such an awesome game. And I guess finally, I love Epic. Games Workshop's Epic Armageddon. Again, such, kind of diverse. I mean, as anybody who knows me would say, well, you've got an army pretty much for every period, for every genre. And yeah, I'm a typical gaming butterfly. I've got so many different systems that, yeah, love it.
Awesome. How about you, Andy?
Andy, what do you think? Are you gonna hedge? Are you gonna hedge like Derek and pick 20 or what?
No, I'll stick with 2 or 3. First of all, BattleTech has to be one of the top 3. I mean, it's an A4 sheet of paper. We don't go into all the detailed rules. We just play it nice and easy. It's a game you can pick up after 6, 9 months, a year of not playing, and play straight away within a couple of minutes. Everybody can pick up and play, and it's we have what we call. I started off a few years ago a retirement group, because Derek and I are both retired, and a few others in our neighbourhood are retired, and we play every two weeks on a Thursday afternoon. And it started off in my garage at home, and it's moved to Big Battles now. But when we were at loose end, BattleTech was picked up, and the people who'd never played it just picked it up and said, "Oh, we may as well play BattleTech," sort of thing, like, to fill the gap. So for a go-to set of rules that's endured 30 years, 30 plus years now, 35 years, something like that. Must be 35 years. 1990 it came out, something like that. Yeah, around that time. I mean, it's stood the test of time, and it's still a absolutely fantastic lot of fun to play. Napoleonics. It's hard to pick up a set of Napoleonic rules now. There's been so many in the past, but General d'Armée version 2 is probably one of my favourites. 28mm. You can use it with 10mm. Derek and I play with 10mm as well. So definitely that's going to be there. And surprisingly, I had to think long and hard about this question, and well, I was looking at it, I think, what rules really, and there's a lot, and there's, if you'd asked me this question 10 or 15 years ago, WAB, Warhammer Ancient Battles, would have definitely been there.
Yeah, WAB.
Because that was so ubiquitous in the UK. It was played, we used to go to competitions with 150, 200 people. Now you go to an Ancients competition, you're lucky to get 20.
Well, and that's a testament to how I played Warhammer Ancient Battles for a while there, and I still see Tim Haslam and everybody in the UK like you still have big events, and that rule set has been dead for what, 20 years?
Tim's in the last 2 years has just resurrected Warhammer Ancient Battles, and he's got a few events, but it's mainly in the north of England. So there's different events, different rule sets have sort of become adopted by different parts of the UK, different clubs. But you can pick up Warhammer Ancient Battles, and if GW ever released a version 3, it would be the go-to rule set, without a shadow of a doubt. So that sort of would have been an old one, but going forward, since taking over Big Battles, I was never a big World War II player. Didn't really interest me. Flames of War, played it, didn't get, I played it because it played at the club and stuff like that. Never really got into World War II, but at Big Battles we decided to host some big World War II games, and we come on to them a bit later. And we went through a lot of playtesting of different rules. I mean, so many different rules for World War II, but we settled on Battle Group, the Forerunner and Northag. And to be honest, it's the only set of World War II rules that I really enjoy playing. So I've got to put them up there now as probably one of my favourite rules that I'm currently playing. Ask me the question 20 years ago, I'd have said to Sound of the Guns, Newbury Fast Play for 15mm Ancient, for Napoleonics, WRG, 6th, 7th edition, for Ancients. So played them all, but currently those are my sort of favourites now. BattleTech, Battle Group, and General d'Armée. Those are my current go-to sets of rules.
Nice.
Great set. The only thing is I grew up playing Napoleon Battles, and I've played a few other Napoleonics games. And for somebody like yourself, it's rare that we have, especially with the people in America, we've got some pretty prolific Napoleonic players, whether it's Shaco or what they've grown up on.
Yeah.
Because I've General d'Armée, what would be, this is a follow-up to that, like why that over other Napoleonics? What do you think it gets right? Because I know the different rule sets will have like, people like how attack columns work, and that's why they picked this rule set, or they think this is more in line. What is if you could put it in like a one sentence thing, why General d'Armée over some of the others? Command.
It's very playable, and the command using the ADCs and the like really makes you think and makes it work, and you do get a good result. So for me personally, it's a great system.
It's enjoyable. It gives you. It's hard to say tabletop games. It gives you realism, but it gives you a good game that you
feel the flavor of the period through it.
I enjoy that more than some other sets.
Yeah, Empire or some of those.
Yeah, it's like, for example, you play, what's the one we played the other day, Derek? Napoleon.
Black Powder.
Yeah, the Black Powder one. Black Powder's got its good sides, but to me it's a bit too relaxed. It's not realistic, especially in the movement area and things like that. And it's not a rule set I like playing. But the one thing of it is, if for big games, it gives you a reasonably quick result. Yeah. General d'Armée is a slower set of rules compared, General Brigade, and all that. But I still prefer General d'Armée because it just gives me that. I enjoy playing it. That's the bottom line. If you enjoy playing a set of rules, that's half the battle.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. No, I know that with Napoleonic, I would say, you're right, in the 70s and 80s, I don't think it was as saturated with rule sets as it is now. And so the idea is like, what, I've heard old friends say, like, if you wargame Napoleonics, you can't wargame anything else, because you got to make sure you got to make sure the epileps, and obviously you're living proof that that's wrong. And we've gamed Napoleonics and stuff like that, and it's fun. But when you get into the history of a period and you find that, you normally like dial in, and then the stories of individual battles like make you want to replicate the units and kind of see that on the tabletop. And so then you start to kind of like dial in the rule set. Like, what is this that gives me additional, and so I find that just interesting. And I'll have to, I think I've played General d'Armée at maybe Historicon or something once or twice, but there are a lot of Napoleonic rule sets. And so for somebody who's played several, like you've said, and the ones you've mentioned, I kind of wanted to know, why is it that way? And fun is always a great answer.
Yeah. And the other thing with it is it's, we tend to take a set of rules and then adapt it like most people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if we find something that doesn't work very well, because we've got the ability to do it, then we just say, right, we're going to change this, change that, move on. We don't get hung up on the rules too much. And a lot of the time we've come to a decision, look at something and go, it's logical to do this, just do it. You know what I mean? So
that's
quite
the sign
in that respect.
That's the sign in my mind of a good GM, because I've had a GM who's gamed 40 plus 50 plus years, who kind of grown up as a family friend, Bob Moon, and he always said, even if he highlighted the game that he was putting on as like, hey, this is Muskets and Tomahawks, this is Fire and Fury, or whatever it is, he would say modified. And so there was one event I asked him, I was like, what does modified mean? And he's just like, because I don't want to argue with people at the table. I can say I've just changed it this way. Like, I want people to have fun. I want people to have fun. And so it's the GM kind of keeping the pulse on the game, and being like, oh, your brigade was trying to outflank here, but they're on the corner of the table and they can't elevate, they can't shift or echelon because that'll make them go off the table. And he's like, that's crazy.
Whoa.
That's ridiculous. So our next kind of question, you guys are similar to me and Windhurst in the sense of we like to game everything. I think there's, we are all over the place. And so that's kind of denoted in your favorite rule set, your kind of story arc here of how you've been a gamer, why you got into gaming and all those things. And I think you've at least hinted at, you do play everything. You're not too much on the favorites. You have some that are leading, and especially over the years that have now like come above a little bit. But if you had to, again, gun to your head, with sci-fi, with BattleTech and the clans, with Napoleonics and the smell of black powder, with World War II and a Stuka flying overhead, what would be, gun to your head, favorite period of wargaming? and why?
Go ahead,
Are
Derek.
you going first?
Okay. Well, I think, Andy, you probably know my favourite period, and that's the English Civil Wars.
Cromwell, yeah.
Yeah, I spent for my sins in my youth some time in the Sealed Knot, the reenactment group, and it's my favourite period. I've researched plenty of it, and I love playing it. So, yeah, for me, English Civil War every time.
Interesting, it didn't make it on your favorite rules list.
Well, because Rob, the problem
There's
with
a good reason.
there is a very good reason. There aren't any really good sets of rules out there for English Civil War. We used to play Warhammer ECW, which was okay. We played Black Powder last week, or the Pike and Shot version, we had a great game, but it's just, it doesn't really give the behind it. So
what he's failing to say is Derek and I have been tossing a set of rules back and forth the last probably 10 years, and we visit it every year or so when we get enthused. I'm surprised he hasn't pulled it up because we just played ECW, saying, "Oh, we should look at the rules again." And we tend to just look at them and go, "Oh." We've had a couple of games using this, and I mean, it's a couple of PowerPoint slides. That's as far as we've got. We've not really, but we can play a game with them because what we say is a gentleman's game. We don't have to have rules for like pikes intercepting a charge, and we just do it because that's what we'd expect it to be done. So we haven't written it up as such, but it's something we really should write up with obviously a slant towards the grander, the bigger battles, because we have now the table space to do that. So, but yeah, ECW, Derek, he's very fanatic about that.
I'll be looking for those rules to come out.
Are you? I have to ask. Are you? Which army do you favor, the Royalists or the Roundheads in that?
Personally, I'm Royalist all the way. I fought with the King's Guard, so yeah.
So
right.
Maybe in Welsh, I should be Royalist as well. But when he chose his army of Royalists, he wanted somebody to fight. So I had to go Parliament. So I have Parliaments.
Derek's Prince Rupert back there. He's got something.
Yeah. He died last weekend, didn't he?
What about you?
With me.
What about you, Andy? What's your, if you had to nail it down to favorite period, to see on the
It's an easy one. It's an easy one for me, Matthew. It's a biblical period, ancient biblical period.
I love it. I love it. Have you seen?
He's got some great armies.
Yeah.
I have my Israelites and my Philistines. Philistines were so hard to find about 6 years ago.
Right.
And I grew up with the minifigs and stuff, and I started looking around, and I found the place in Australia. I can't remember the name of that company that do the Ark and everything else.
Eureka?
Some Philistines. No, it's not Eureka. It's something like Castaway Studios or something.
Oh, right.
They do the Moses, and they only do like a handful of models, and then New Line Designs.
Sure. Yes.
They do some pretty, and this was before like the really cool models came out. But I profess, I'll say this, I profess to be a Christian, and not to get political or religious, there's so much that people who, whatever side they fall on, they just don't know the history of it. And so as I, during COVID and everything else, was doing one of those kind of yearly studies in the Bible, and I've always, you grow up with David, this big warrior, and David and Goliath, like we all learned that in Sunday school. And so I was just like, man, I would like to dive into this more, especially as somebody who professes to do this. So I just got wrapped up in it. And over here I have an Assyrian army that I have like 16 chariots in. And
is that all?
By what? Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's by one of my favorite miniatures manufacturers, Foundry, Wargames Foundry Assyrians, were the gold standard for so long. And the Chaldeans that got in there. And so I know they're a little bit smaller than the new 28s, but I just love them. When I see them on the tabletop, they're awesome.
My new kingdom is 50% Wargames Foundry, and the rest is New Line. But yeah, biblical to me. I love the history of it. It's so old. Go far back as Sumer and Akkad, and then you move through all the biblical areas. And it's when I play ancients, I like bow, chariots, and ultimately elephants. So as long as I've got bow and chariot, which is basically biblical period, with a few pointy sticks. And when you play in biblical period, you say you mentioned Assyrian and Israelites. I have an Israelite, I have an Assyrian army, which was my COVID army. And I literally only finished it about a week ago. It's got like 20 heavy chariots in, 60, 70 cavalry, and 400 or 500 infantry.
That's awesome.
It's a really nice thing. But I've got Israelites, Sumerian, Trojan, New Kingdom Egyptian, Mitanni. I've forgotten something else. So it's one of my favourite periods, and when you play a game, no matter what rule set it is, it's absolute carnage because there's no armour. Everyone's just got wooden sticks and a little shield usually. Some of them might have a bit of armour with the Assyrians and stuff, but mainly it's a shield, maybe a bit of leather armour or something, or hide or whatever. But it's just carnage. So you're literally killing everything on the table, and you sway the units being taken off. It's just, for me, it's just great fun, no matter what rule set. I've really always been taken with the biblical period of.
And that's what you read about in these battles. Whatever ancient historian you pick to. You mentioned Trojans, Mycenae, even kind of like in there, and then you just thousands in sword and spear combat with, like you said, there's very little armor. It is a slog. And so
it's a slog. I mean, we played actually, we started what's the word I'm looking for? Last year we played the Battle of Troy, basically, and I provided my Trojan forces against the Greeks. One of my friends, Warren, who organised the Battle of Troy, and we played it at the club, and we invited lots of other people to play. And we repeated it again this year. And this year, the Trojans, won. Our chariots destroyed the flanks of the Greeks and just wrapped them up. It was quite a drubbing for the Greeks this time. But it's just great fun when you get all the chariots on the table. So it is. Yeah.
That was. I look forward. Well, I'll kick it over to Windhurst for the next question, but I look forward to when Big Battles does Big Battle Kadesh, and I just want to see. I want to see a 16-foot table with hundreds of chariots and be like, "Is this 1-to-1 scale, Andy?" Because that will be awesome.
I'll come on to that in a minute. So I think there's a question related, and I'll come back to that one because
okay,
it's not quite. Yeah. We're looking at stuff, but yeah.
That's
awesome.
I'll wait till then. I think there's a question. I haven't got them in front of me, but there's a question coming up related to that. So.
Okay,
all right.
Perfect.
Well, let's see if this is it. So the next one, and this one kind of confuses people sometimes, but what's your favorite model or unit in your collection? So it can be like one of two things. It can be this is your favorite model you're the most proud of, you love to show it off, or it's your favorite unit that if you have the opportunity, you're getting it on the table every time, 100% of the time, regardless if they're good or not, because you just love it so much. If you have one that falls in either, it might fall in both those categories. But yeah, your favorite model or unit.
Just say it, Eric. I know which one it is.
Well, you know where it is. It's my Kingsguard in my English Civil War army. It always trundles out. Because we never determine their quality before we start playing the game, invariably they come out bad. And then Andy then dismisses them very simply, and they're always running away. So I just love them, though. They're one of the first regiments I painted. They're still going strong now. I've just rebased them. So, yeah. That's the way it is.
Kingsguard.
Just to reiterate that, what Derek and I, when we play ECW, we tend to not put points on the table. We just get our figures, put them on the table in the units, and if there's like a quality level, like raw recruits or whatever, we tend to play early English Civil War, so we tend to have a lot of raw recruits on the table or trained. But obviously the King's Guard, is the King's Guard. So we give them a plus on the dice. So we randomly roll to represent their quality level. So, and it could be 1, 2, 3, 4 is raw, 5 is trained, 6 is veteran. But we probably give the king's got a +1, and it's not so much to reflect that they should be veteran or something. It's reflect how far have they marched overnight, have they been fed, have they had a rest, before they go into battle. It's just how the people are really feeling at that point in time. And invariably he ends up as raw and he gets slaughtered, and I usually capture his standard and things like that. So
it's just bad dice.
It's an ongoing thing with us. So we were at Nottingham for a big event with John Stallard, who wrote the rules and all that. And I actually took it out with a mortar, didn't I?
You did. Thank you for reminding me of that. The Battle of Poble's Wood, it was called.
Yes, that's the one. So we I understand why Derek goes for that. For me, it's really difficult because the question is really sort of towards wargaming, historical wargaming and all that. But to be honest, I have to include Dungeons and Dragons in there. And to me, it's a number of figures that I mainly DM, and as an example, only about a year ago, 18 months ago, we just completed, after 32 years, a campaign. Wow. So I won't go in and bore you and all that, but that campaign had a primary, a nemesis, and the guys who had met in the army, to the point that their 25-year-old son joined in the game. He wasn't even born when we started the campaign. So some of the figures that I personally had sculpted or designed, for that campaign are the ones that hold a special place for me.
That's impressive.
What was their
big bad?
Like clan name, or the Fellowship of the Ring? What is the
they were called the Falconers.
The Falconers. I like it. I like it.
But that was, to sort of summarize it, we played a group of guys 32 years ago. We played a campaign. Basically, we're in two different locations in Germany in the army, and I wrote a scenario that brought everybody together. And it was a nemesis, a lich nemesis, an undead wizard. And they loved it. Absolutely loved it. We failed to kill it. So about 2 years later, it's a bit fuzzy because none of us can quite remember. I was in the UK, and people came from Germany, Scotland, all over UK to play another game, the sequel, number 2. And that was in 1991-ish, we think. And then obviously we went our ways, the campaign stopped, we all went our ways. And then about 12 years ago, long story, we got back together and we started playing, and the guy said, "Can we do the finale?" I said, "Well, I haven't written it." So I have to write the finale, but the likes of Derek and 1 or 2 other new people, like one of the guy's sons wanted to join in. We needed to get a load of characters up to the right level. So we played for 10 years before we got to the right level. Yeah, so we played another 10 years of campaigning with the characters, and then we played a weekend game for the whole weekend, and then COVID hit us, so we had to restart afterwards. But the guys, for a campaign, it lasted 30, 35 years, something like that. So pretty special. And the figures, I had a number of figures sculpted for it, but the Nemesis and 1 or 2 of the other main characters, they're the special units figures, if you like.
Oh, yeah.
For me, because they span 30 odd years of gaming, and a campaign that I wrote, and people have come from all over the country and different countries to play.
No, that's awesome. That's the hobby. That's the strong bonds and the relationships that you build is just a branch of the hobby, and it's definitely one of the bedrocks, I think, for most. Switching again to our next question. This is another people kind of asked for this explanation as too. So what is the best war game you've ever played? And it's not just the rule set, but we're asking about the actual game, so like there I was at Salute, or there I was across from Derek, the right amount of Cheeto dust. I just reach into my hand on the dice, and so I'm rolling 6s. I often remember about at Historicon the time the Texans won the Alamo. Like they just rolled hot, and so they beat the crap out of Santa Ana, or the British hold off the Mahdi at Khartoum. And it doesn't have to be that, right? The people mainly make the best war game. So what is your guys, out of your whole career and the longevity of it, I know that's going to be hard to pick because there's been some barn burners, I'm sure. But if you had to, like, what is that top one, or at least in there, for best war game you've ever played?
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, from my perspective, I'm going to embarrass Andy here because this is probably up there because it's right in my brain set. But
The
we
time
went
the
to
king
Warfare
started
a couple
winning.
of years ago, and we played sword point competition. Now, Andy's up there, and I'm right down the bottom. And it came down to the last day, and I actually got a draw out of him. And for me, I was absolutely ecstatic. So that really is one of my favourite games because I'm usually trounced.
Derek, I hope you had some crap army too, like Gauls or something, that just made it even that much sweeter when you.
Romans.
Oh, okay.
Rock solid Romans.
Rock solid.
What did I have? I can't remember what I fought you with.
Probably Persians, I think, mate, or
My
something like
Persians.
that.
I mean, I remember the game because I was sort of, the game was like, this could put me right up there in the top, the rankings. And I'm like, right. And I thought, oh, Derek, and I wasn't being complacent. It's always a great game against Derek. But it was like, yeah. And then suddenly, an hour into the game, I'm like, oh, this is not easy. This is getting tougher. And honestly, I had to pull everything out of the bag. It was one of the tough. I was mentally drained at the end of it. It was one of those games you go, what have you been eating, drinking, Derek, to play like? It was just like he was up here, like, metagaming. He was right up there. So yeah, I understand that. For me, it's a number of games. 15 years ago or something, a couple of us used to play on Father's Day here in the UK. We used to get together, a couple of guys drive down, and we used to play anything from biblical to Indian Mutiny to American Civil War. We did Gettysburg in 28mm. We did Indian Mutiny, the Siege of Delhi, and all that. But on one of the games, we put basically a what-if scenario, and we had New Kingdom Egyptian versus Hittites, so Kadesh-like, and which is the reference I had. And a couple of years prior to this one particular game, we had about 90 chariots on the table in 28mm. So we said, we've got to do better than that. So we put a very substantial order into Sean at New Line, who gave us a very good price, and we ended up with over 200 chariots on the table.
Wow.
A couple of thousand figures. Our chariot units were 10 chariots a unit.
Holy cow.
Yeah. And that's it. We only had a 14x6 table, so we were deep in chariots, and we had 2 wings, and we played for the weekend, and we had 2 games in one day. That's how quick the games. We were using WAB at the time, and there was 4 of us playing, and they all loved the biblical period, and it was just a clash of chariots and spears and bowmen, and it was, to see 200 plus chariots on the table with associated infantry was kind of special. And the fact, like, by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we looked at each other and went, yeah, let's start again. You've lost. It was so decisive. It was incredible. The next game was a bit closer and all that, so it was really good fun. So that's my real memorable game, doing that. So
I would say, Windhurst, we probably talked that next question.
Yeah, we'll skip
the transition. If you want to skip and go ahead to the next one.
Yeah, so we're going to skip the one asking about transition because you guys have already kind of covered that.
Okay.
So the next couple questions is going to start leading us into talking a little bit more about big battles. But when did you all decide to kind of get into the business side of the hobby? Did it start with big battles, or had you dabbled in it a little bit before that? Like, kind of, what did that thought process and experience look like for you guys?
You want me to go first on this one, Derek?
Yeah, I can do. I mean, it's probably you'll have probably more to say than I, but I think it was about 22 when we actually got ourselves into finding a venue for big battles. Andy and I discussed it a long time before that as to, well, we're both retired, we both love playing big games. A 6x4 table really doesn't do it. And that was the real thought pattern behind Big Battles, essentially. I hadn't been in any kind of aspect at all in the business side of wargaming, but been a long time purveyor of their goods, shall we say. So I think it was 22, wasn't it, Andy? We actually got
it was
Big Battles.
Well, COVID. It was actually pre-COVID. We started. So anyhow, let me go right to the beginning. I've been in the war games business for 20 years plus. It started off as a hobby in that I designed the club's website, and that's led on, and now I host quite a number of war games websites here in the UK as a business. So 30, 40, 50 websites, I can't remember the number now, somewhere around 50 something. For war games, a lot of them mostly war games related. I've been doing it for many years, and I use it basically. I used to design websites for companies like Shaw and New Line for figures. I'd say, give me this much money's worth of figures. So, it was a win-win scenario for everybody until my wife said, you've got enough figures. So I had to move into the money realm. So basically, I was running a sort of hobby-related business, hosting websites, designing websites for war games companies for the last 20 years or something. I then at some point decided that the number of figures I'd had commissioned for me, for example, we played a Borodino game in 28mm, and we didn't have the Garde du Corps, the Zastro Saxon cuirassiers that took the redoubt, the Great Redoubt. So I got one of the sculptors to sculpt them for me in the style of front rank. I thought, why don't I just sell them on a website? So I put a website together, it's called Conqueror Models, and I sold them. And a number of my fantasy figures I had sculpted, I had a range sculpted by Colin Patton for me, a load of dwarfs. They're all sculpted on there and all that. So I've been selling them through another website of mine. I've even got Saxon Napoleonics, of which Derek's part of that business as well, which he's probably forgotten about, which is we purchased a load of Saxon Calpe infantry molds from Calpe because he resculpted them. He wasn't happy with the pack makeup. They were in 3s instead of 4s or 6s. So we basically purchased them from him, and they're sold on my website as well. But Derek's part of the infantry of that, not the cavalry. So those sort of, I've been dabbling in the business, and it's more to fund my hobby business. So it's do the business, the funds from that pay for other stuff in the hobby, basically. And then, as Derek mentioned, then Big Battles, that sort of came along because I retired at 50-year-old. Derek was a few years after me. It took me a lot of badgering to get him to retire. And then at some point I turned and said, 14 by 6 tables just not big enough, is it? And he said, no. And I said, we need bigger tables. And that's when we started looking around in terms of Big Battles. So there's some questions later on which will cover that. So
that's awesome. All I can say is you're definitely a Saxonite, it sounds like, over the years here. You like painting white. You like taking the trash of the Napoleonics infantry. So one of the other questions, and again, I think some of these questions are mentioned in later, so we'll bounce around a little bit. But we like talking to people like this. It seems like, a lot of people do that in the hobby, and they have that template for getting into the business side of it. It's like, first of all, it's a passion. And then they're like, man, I'm spending so much time into this, and especially if you're doing your own products, you're doing your own models. We talked to Corey at Cigar Box. He was doing his own mats for his tables. And then they're just like, hey, a buddy at your group or whatever is like, hey, can you make me one of those, or can you do this? And then you're like, wow, this will help, rob Peter to pay Paul. This will pay for some of my expenditures in the hobby. And, then you kind of get a plan, or, maybe it's a little risk adverse, or you don't need that much capital to start it. And so I feel most people that get into the hobby side kind of have that trajectory. But I go back to the great one of the great field commanders, the boxer Mike Tyson. He always says everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And so in saying that, like, what is, as much as you know about the hobby and as much as this hobby and even the business side is so communal, like, you know, you have these relationships, you know kind of what will sell or what will not. And if you're, regardless, you're doing it as a passion project. But what do you think, what is, you know, one or some of the unanticipated lessons learned? In the Army, we say you're either winning or you're learning. You're never losing. You're learning. You're adapting. You're, oh, I got punched in the mouth. But from you guys, whether it's the business side, taxes, whatever, you know, relationships, what would you think would be one of the kind of unanticipated lessons learned? And I know you went in eyes wide open. I mean, based on kind of how you guys said that. So I think it would probably be a hard one, but maybe you just kind of you didn't even think about this until you're now knee deep in it.
I know. This was, from my perspective, this was, you know, I took the idea to Derek for big battles. It's something that's been on the cards for many years. And I'm lucky I was able to retire early, and I don't need it to pay the mortgage, which is, you know, a really good position to be in. But I don't know. You already touched before the call that you don't get rich in this hobby. Well, there's a couple of people who get rich. You know, Games Workshop is doing phenomenally well.
GW, yeah, GW, yeah. Rolling in money.
FTSE 100, can't complain. They've got a lot of work to stay there to do, mind. But, you know, there's a couple of other large companies around the world. We're not going to count Hasbro or somebody like that. We're talking about dedicated gamers, you know, like Grip and Beast, Warlord, that type of thing. You know, they aren't the true, you know, turning over tens and hundreds of millions. You know, they might do 1 or 2 mil or something, a couple of mil, but they're not in the tens or hundreds of millions. You know, they're not all being multimillionaires. And I have a friend, an accountant, who said, "You never become rich running a war games company." That was an accountant. So, you know, a lot of these it's a passion. A lot of people, I think, are a little surprised when they don't see the enthusiasm for their products. They paid a lot of money to be sculpted and manufactured, turn into sales. You know, some will, you know, they'll pick a weird scale, or they'll pick a weird period, or they'll pick something that's done to death and go, why isn't everybody buying them? And it's really hard. Or they'll make some scenery or something. And it is difficult. They'll make sales, but they're not going to make them the way they thought they would. And that's hard to see some people ploughing. And a lot of people tend to put their retirement funds into these businesses.
Yeah.
So
it's not good. So, I mean, that's, you know, speaking of that, that probably wasn't really an unanticipated. You kind of knew the lay of the land, and especially with being in the hobby for 20 years, you know, yeah. I'm sure, you know, and not to talk on this podcast, you know, there's always, money changes people, and I hear that as a lesson learned. And so groups and people that you had friends with, once you're, you know, into the, okay, well, tends to fall like that economic principle. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Like, one of the unanticipated lessons learned, I think Andy did a good job kind of talking about, you know, he was able to put his toe in the water, I think, with kind of the support he gave to companies, the ability to kind of not have, you know, his nest egg probably establishing big battles or the business that he's in. Derek, with you, you know, and all the work that you've done, and we talked a little bit about your civilian career because we had some technical difficulties here recently with you sabotaging Andy's computer being in telecommunications. But what do you think, and again, whether from the business side, kind of any unanticipated lessons learned from you on kind of moving into that direction?
I've learned so much because being in the big corporate world, you don't tend to see things like VAT, some of the financial things that you have to go through, getting your company records done, keeping a tab on. I mean, I've always been quite astute with the budgeting and things, but this is different. And getting your VAT in on time, getting your records up to Companies House and everything else, that's been a big learning curve for me personally. And And yeah, I mean, actually putting a business head on things rather than just, we're here to play games and just roll some dice.
I've still, that never, hopefully when your hobby becomes work, right, that can take the fun out of it. And hopefully that's never happened, even if it's come danger close. Yeah.
No,
I think you're right, Matt. It has come close because, Derek and I went into big battles, eyes wide open. With, and I said explicitly to Derek, I said, you were not going to make money. Just to be very clear, to make money on this type of business, because I know one of your questions later is going to be this, around this area, you're 24/7, 7 days a week. You really, and you have to be all over social media, massively over social media. You have to be conversant with everything Games Workshop does. You have to embrace Games Workshop. There's no ifs or buts about it. That is one of the things you must embrace. And then you have to be cognizant of all the other trends happening around the place to latch onto them and utilize them to fund your business. So if you're out to make money, be prepared to lose every single weekend of your life, work late, long hours, etc.
No, that's awesome. It always helps our listeners, give back good responses, listeners and viewers on, talking to you guys about anybody who starts this. And then, if somebody's got a fire burning in them for the venue side of it, the hobby side of it, the sculpt side of it, whatever, I think these comments have been pretty well received by the wargaming community when they listen to people who have done it before and can kind of Sherpa. So I'll kick it over to Windhurst for the next question.
Yeah, so one thing we really like to ask, especially our guests who are tied into the business side of the hobby, but what, from your perspective, are issues facing the hobby? So, like the common one that we showed you as an example is a lot of people think the hobby's graying. It's all old farts and not enough young people. But is that something you're noticing? Or are there other issues facing the hobby? And then kind of our last question in this section, just to tie it up, how do you tackle it, or how do you think businesses ought to tackle it?
Wow. That's a big question, guys. All right, first of all, my first thing is COVID didn't do the hobby any favors.
No.
I mean, it did from one perspective in that
personal hobby time was well agreed.
So paint figures, and to be honest, a lot of companies, they've never been more profitable because there was no shows to go to. They were shipping stuff through the post office every week, and I host a lot of wargames companies. A lot of them are doing extremely well out of it. Flip side, some of the larger ones struggle because they have a lot of bricks and mortar outlets and they resell, and they weren't getting the resell from the bricks and mortar. So a lot of the smaller companies did very well because they were still able to go to the post office here in the UK and ship all the products out. So, what do people do sat at home all day? They paint figures. To paint figures, you got to buy them. So that was great. But after everyone came back, after COVID, there was a big downturn, in a number of clubs. People just didn't go to the clubs. So that happened. Money was being spent elsewhere, i.e. holidays. I want to go away. I want to enjoy myself. I've been cooped up for a year and a half or whatever. So there was a big dynamic change, and I think that hurt the hobby more than anything. It's starting to recover now. We see clubs and people getting more and more members back, but they're not at the levels they were pre-COVID, in my view. Some may be, but some aren't. So that's one thing I think that hurt the hobby, and is still recovering from.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Andy. And also I'd say that what we tend to see is that a lot of the youngsters, they come in and they play a lot of GW games because their marketing and everything else is superior. But if you don't see the clubs, you don't get that opportunity as we had as youngsters to play different types of games, to learn about history, to understand that well, it's not all Space Marines and elves. There are other things in this world, and the history behind it, and learning that gives you a lot more than just playing a good game. It gives you, perhaps a nod to go and do something later on in your own time, learning something. It's a big difference,
I still think, everyone has to go at GW. It's too costly. You had Space Marines, but at the end of the day, it is one of the biggest roads into the gaming hobby.
Oh, yeah.
Without GW, we wouldn't be anywhere near the scale we are now as a hobby, because they bring lots and lots of people in. And yes, lots and lots of people, especially the younger ones, and I'm saying pre-30-year-old, they tend to, play GW games, tend to get married, then tend to stop for a few years, possibly. I certainly did when I got married and young kids and all that. Just didn't have the time, and then corporate life took over, and then I slowly got back into stuff. But then as you grow older, you tend to, this is the greying part I think you mentioned, Rob, you get a bit older, your kids are a little bit older, they're doing their own thing in the evening, they're teenagers, you might want to get them involved. You've got a bit more disposable income, you can buy a few more toys, you start experimenting, not just with GW, with other systems, and then you start getting back into the hobby because it's never really left you. Once you've played it, I think you're kind of hooked most of the time. So, I think that's what happens. There's a gap in people's, where some people just life gets in the way. Being married, children, job, whatever, travel, whatever, and I think that hurt the hobby, especially with COVID, because people just said, "While I stay cooped up in a room playing games, I want to get out. I've been cooped up for the last 12 months." So they were getting out. But now the hobby, I think, is on an upward trend.
I agree. I think Derek made some great points, and you as well, Andy, on that about people Sherpaing you through it and kind of guiding you. And so whether it was the friends that you talked about who got you into the hobby early on, or just being there at a game store. I mean, I remember being a kid at these conventions and people letting me play with their 7 years war armies, and I'm some snot-nosed kid, and that I'm sure the person was cringing at the time. And so now I kind of, as I'm demoing games and somebody picks up my squad of Waffen SS I painted, and they're I spent so much time on the PDOT, and they crumple them together, and I'm like, oh God, but hopefully this helps that person. You
have no idea, man. You have no idea.
Yeah. Especially with your venue, which we're gonna talk about too soon. So I think you guys mentioned. I do think COVID plus has hopefully the hobby's bouncing back like we see, and I do see everybody who's in the hobby kind of goes to your point. I think we're on an upward trend. We're in a golden age. We talked about the 70s and 80s with WRG and Featherstone and everything else that's kind of extended the hobby, but now with making it more easily accessible in the 3D prints and how that's going to change the future. And GW is cool. They got Henry Cavill's on some billboard outside your house right now saying play Warhammer. But all of that's awesome. And so I think your guys' answers are very timely, and no matter who's listening to this and what they're thinking about pursuing the hobby, is it alive and healthy? I think it is alive and healthy. What's going to be the future? Who knows? We thought in the late 2070s, whatever, the Jetsons, we'd have flying cars and robots. We're not there yet. We're close with AI, but we'll see. But we want to switch topics now to dial a little bit more into big battles. And so this is something I been a huge purveyor of the hobby for a long time, and so has Windhurst. And we've just heard about these places, these hidden gems, the Wargames Holiday Center, these places where you can go and everything's provided, and for a flat fee you get one of the best games ever. And I don't know, you guys, you get 5 pounds knocked off if you help clean up, help put models back in the box, we'll see. That's something maybe you should think about. But what I want to direct to is, because our United States listeners, maybe they have heard about this, maybe they haven't. And so wargaming venues are, places that you go where you can either rent tables, you rent terrain, you rent, armies, you rent battles to be set up and even GM'd by you guys. And we're going to talk a little bit about everything in between that. But to you two specific gentlemen who have so much time in the hobby, why sell the wargaming venue? You know, whose idea was it? And then what was the need, you know, you were supplying? You got to have a customer out there. You got to have somebody buy, like you said. Nobody wants the 6mm 7 Days War models or something that's really obscure, right? Like the Emu War from Australia. You know that's not going to sell. Maybe the one guy. But what about this? You know, led you to the venue idea, other than your own self-interest. What I've heard you guys say is, we need bigger 6x4. We're going to play on it. Somebody will come play with it, and we'll have them pay us.
Right. No, actually, you've got to say what you want to play, because, as I said, Derek, there are a number of, like you mentioned, the legendary War Games Holiday Centre run by Mark Freeth. I mean, I think a lot of gamers in the UK, I've been there, Derek's been there, we've all played games there. And when you put 6, 7, 8,000 Napoleonic figures on the table, it's something else. You know, it is fantastic. You know, and long may it continue. We are not, you know, in that area whatsoever. You know, he's completely different. He's got the Napoleonic era. There's a couple of other sort of venues like ourselves around, but Derek and I set her up with the intent of, we're running this for us, and we're going to rent it out to bring in some pennies to help pay for the venue.
I like it.
Not the other way around, i.e., this isn't a business and we're going to use it to generate income. This is the other way around for us. And we're very cognizant of that. So, you know, my gaming garage is still there, and I had a 14 by 6 foot table, which was, you know, in the UK, as Rob will attest, we've got massive houses. No, we haven't got big houses. They're all small houses, you know. We don't have, you know, unless you're lucky to live on a farm or something, you know, my garage was converted into 14'6" table. Great gaming venue, played many years in there. And when I retired, and Derek eventually persuaded him to retire, I said to him, wouldn't it be nice to have a big game on a big table, a la War Games Holiday Centre? And he said yes. So I then came up with the idea, why don't we just rent somewhere to go, and in our case as well, to store our stuff. And Rob will attest, there's quite a bit of stuff in the unit. Rob's been posting all over Facebook, is packing up pictures, and we can attest to that. There's a lot of stuff stored at the unit. So we decided that, we wanted a lot of big tables to play. We were sick of putting, a brigade of infantry and Napoleonics on the table and moving forward and backwards on a 6x4 table. There was no maneuverability. There was nothing. Forget cavalry. You're just no good in 28mm Napoleonics on a 6x4. It's forward, back. That's about all you can do. So we wanted a big table. So we went big. As big as we could afford, etc., and all that. So that was the premise behind it. Obviously, the War Games Holiday Centre comes to mind. We do, as you say, rent out and run games. We'll come on to that in a moment. But the premise was that me and Derek wanted to play big games. So sometimes we play on 20 foot of table. Only awesome. 20 foot.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, but that's a choice. So we can do whatever we want when we want. And it just makes it that much more enjoyable, because I think most gamers will collect an army and they'll go, oh, well, I'll make the number up, 2,000 points. They end up with 4,000 or 5,000 points with all the options over the years. And they invariably keep putting the same 2,000 points on. Sometimes it's nice just to go, just bring everything you've got, put it on the table and play with it. And that's what we do. And that's what we enjoy doing. We don't worry about points. We just put it on the table and play.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Derek, anything to add to kind of the idea behind it? It sounds like with Andy, as you guys had this idea and it was like, okay, how can we're paying this much for a storage unit anyways, we'll pay this and then maybe we can cover some terrain repairs or something off of the kind of rental costs. So
yeah, I mean, Andy's kind of eloquently put the position we're in. We're doing it for us, really, but as a side point to that is something which I quite like, because we open up to the locals who haven't really got a gaming space. So every other week of an evening on a Wednesday night, we invite anyone who wants to come in and just set up a game, whether they want a 6x4 table or larger. And we've started to grow the community in the area to have a gaming space, basically, which they didn't have before. So from my perspective, that's great, because I'm talking to a lot of people I don't know. I'm introducing them to my hobby, my ideas, different games I've played, so that, you know, they've got perhaps what I had when I was a youngster, somebody giving them their experience and their thoughts. And it's opened the games community up in the area considerably, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you got the guys come in, they play 40k, and it's very popular 40k, obviously. But they come in and they stop and have a look at the table that's maybe running a medieval, 100 Years of War or something like that, or a World War II game or something, and they'll go, wow. And when you start explaining the cost of the models to them in relation to 40k models, they just look at you and go, how much? That cheap? And we're like, wow, no, these are expensive. And it's a start. Some of them are die-hard, 40k players. They only play, 40k, nothing else. But they do admire a lot of the terrain we have hanging around and utilize that. And it's sort of, you can see there's a little bit of an interest there. And if they start to play something else, using our figures and all that, that's fine. We're happy for that, because we want to just broaden the hobby, and if they bring other people along, even better, which is what's happening. There's a nice little group of the 40kers now playing there, but they're actually seeing other games. And one of the guys, he was playing 6mm ECW and all that, but now he's got a nice 28mm Napoleonic Prussian division. So he's sort of branching out, which is nice to see.
Yeah.
So
yeah, so he plays one of the weaker 40k armies, and he was tired of getting his face crushed in. Is what it sounds like.
The thing is that I'm not a 40k player, but I'm in awe of some of the armies they put on the table in terms of the models and the painting.
Yeah. I could just see
to look at.
I could see Andy in the corner being like, "Oh, you think they're bad? Come over here. Let me tell you about these Saxons."
Or his Persians.
Yeah.
Persians.
But no, that's awesome. I'll kick it over to Windhurst for the next question.
Yeah. So for the next one, as far as you're comfortable in saying, but kind of like, what was like the startup cost? I know you mentioned you rent the venue. I've seen all your tables. They're beautiful big tables. We were actually talking about them last time I was there, that I want to build some like that. I know that I've seen you all building those terrain inserts. So I know a lot of this was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that you put into it. But that's all stuff you're doing yourself, and that's all materials you're having to buy. And like you said, this was less of we are providing terrain and models for customers to use. It's more for us to use, but people can use it if they're renting table space.
Some of it's more for the customers. Like some of the World War II stuff we put together, that's been specific for a couple of games. You've seen the town, Rob, and everything like that we put together. That was specific for the customers. But, I mean, we're not going to divulge actual numbers, but it's not an insubstantial amount. It's, in the many thousands you need to set up. I mean, and the bad news is that, or was for us, I don't know about in the US, but in the UK, I'm going to use the word MDF. Do you have the same thing?
Yeah.
MDF, yeah. A sheet of MDF in the UK was 6x4 foot roughly, 13 quid, £13, $15, $16 pre-COVID. Post-COVID, 35, $40.
Brexit. Wow.
No, post-COVID. Honestly, it was like the cost of building. Just to give you an idea, the cost of building. We have 18 tables, 6x4, and we made a conscious decision to actually have 18 separate tables so that we could spin them around in different configurations. The typical configuration is 3 rows of 6 tables. So we've got 24 foot by 6 foot wide in 3 rows. But we do L shapes, we do all sorts. That cost, without the terrain going on top, nearly £2,000.
Wow.
Just
I
in
mean,
lumber.
just lumber, and something
Screws.
we didn't even consider when putting costs together was you need a £60 power drill, a power driver, electric drill is going to be a powered one, so it's like, yeah, that's something we didn't consider. You then need, all the screws, they won't cost anything. Actually, the screws cost 50, 60, £100, £200 possibly, because each leg has many screws in, and we have a lot of legs on 18 tables, so it's like people could underestimate considerably the cost of the table, just the lumber for the table. We initially had MDF on the top and a shelf of MDF underneath. We went from MDF on the top, we kept it, but reduced the thickness, and then we had what we call OSB, which is a cheaper flat board.
Plywood,
Yeah.
board.
Yeah. So underneath, just to save a couple of quid, or a couple of bucks for US listeners. So, so that was quite an investment in its own right. Lots of other little costs for starting up, which people don't consider. We were lucky when we took the unit, they renovated the small kitchenette area we had, and they put 2 brand new toilets in. You need toilets. You have to have toilets. It sounds silly, but you need some good, decent toilets. We carpeted the whole flooring area, 2,000 square feet of carpeting, because walking on a concrete floor isn't fun. So we carpeted it. So it sounds but that was a chunk of cost as well on top of everything else.
And these they just start climbing. Like that's, you can, and you guys don't do anything small, right? I.e. big battles. And so, you're doing this for yourselves, but that's definitely something, for the listener to think about. It's so foreign, like the concept for it to us. And we're going to kind of mention it here, going into the next question, I think. So I've seen, most people start, I would say around here is we don't have anything like that where it's just a venue kind of solo and you rent for the time. Most stores in the United States you can play for free. Like if there's a table open, you can ask to reserve it and you can play for free. I've seen stores as a way to just, keep the lights on and stuff like that say, well, you've got to give us, give us 20 quid, or $20, whatever it is, $10. And then you get it back in store credit. So you at least have to you can't take up a table for 4 to 6 hours without, buy drinks, whatever, but that helps the electricity bill. And it's just kind of foreign in the concept of this. So it kind of goes into our next question is kind of, what is being sold? And here I'd like to, I know this is a pet project for both of you and a passion project to be like, hey, I want to game at big tables. So what can somebody who's in, England, what would they be able to purchase from you between, hey, I want to rent a table to, I want the, the works, I want to play the BEF versus the early war Germans, somewhere in 1940. And so kind of walk us through that.
Do you want to take it?
Go on then, mate.
So basically, on our website, you can rent a table. Because Derek and I are there Monday to Sunday, but we do take weekends off and we block weekends out. Yeah. So like this weekend was blocked out for me and all that. So you can rent a table and we basically charge by the table. We don't care how many people play on the table. We rent the table and we don't try to sell any tea, coffee or juice. We provide that free of charge, included in the price. We have a plethora. We have lots and lots of eateries around us. We're very lucky for that.
It's nice.
It's excellent. Rob, you've experienced it, yeah? It's phenomenally good. So we don't get involved in the catering side. We let people choose their own catering. They can have their own allergies and oatmeal milk and stuff like that. It's up to them. So you can rent a table Monday to Friday. You can rent 2 tables, 3 tables, 10 tables. You can rent the whole venue for the day. It's entirely up to you. So, and on the weekend, you can do the same. But on weekends, we tend to have, not all the time, irregularly we have different events going on throughout the year. We run some events. We have private groups of people who book the hall, or they book a number of tables, and sometimes they might book 8 or 10 tables, and we'll make a decision that, you know, we're not going to rent any more out because they're just taking too much space up, because they want it in an L shape or a T shape, or they're going to do something and they got lots of figures and they need a bit more storage. So we're quite flexible in that regard, but you can rent from a single table to the 18 tables. You can rent the venue out for the weekend. You can rent half the venue. It's entirely up to you, or you can come along to one of the hosted competitions or the events going on, or you can come to one of our events, which are primarily World War II or Warhammer Fantasy at the moment, although we have some other ideas for this later on this year. But those are the ones. So people get a choice of what they want to do. We are not expensive, you know, in our view. You know, we charge equivalent for the day. We rent the table by the day. So on a weekend, it's £20 for the day. So you can get it from 9:30 in the morning till 5:30ish in the afternoon, evening. We tend to say, yeah, if we are playing a game and we're still there at 5:30, carry on playing. There's no extra charge. If we're there till 9 o'clock at night, carry on playing. We're sort of flexible in that respect. It's not like 9 till 5, close the doors. It's, yeah, whatever. If someone says, can we come in at 8 to set up? We go, yeah, you can come in at 8. You know, as long as one of us is available to do it, we'll flex along those lines. So
that's a good deal too. I mean, like you said, you got restrooms, you got a lot of eateries around you, you got, you know, coffee, tea, whatever kind of included. That's not bad for the low level costs. What is the works? What is the BEF versus the Germans weekend battle?
If you want to turn up for that weekend, the current price is £60 per person. That's all.
2 days of gaming, 3 days?
2 days. Saturday and Sunday, from early Saturday morning. And you alluded earlier on, I think, about, you know, helping to put the figures away and pull them out. We don't do any of that. We give you 2 days of solid gaming. Once you arrive in the hall, let's say you're doing the early war, defence of Dunkirk or something like that. Is that the one you've done, Rob? Yeah. So you turn up, you get given an army list, you get given a tray, and your figures are on the tray. There's nothing to get out. They're all there on the tray. You've got your army list. You deploy the troops. Some may already be deployed on the table for you. And you literally then have reserves that you can come on throughout the weekend, obviously. And you play the game. And then, to be honest, although the game is supposed to finish around 5 o'clock on a Sunday, it naturally comes to a conclusion between 2:30 and 4 o'clock. It comes to a natural, most weekend, by the time people get to that point, they're ready to finish. So, but once we decide that the game is finished, we stop everybody and they leave the tables as is, and that's it. They don't put any figures away. And there's 2 reasons for that. They're not paying to put figures away, they're paying to play. And secondly, we want to put them away because we want to find all the breakages.
No, that's good. That is impressive in that sense, and the idea that you can kind of plug and play. And then I think something that you're not mentioning too, that I think is definitely key to these, is you got the GMs right there. So I'm going to go over to Andy, and I'm going to talk up, you know, something that Andy likes really quick about Persians or something, so I get a good rules rolling on, like, hey, my guys are in contact, aren't they, Andy? So you've got GMs kind of built in there. And so what, as far as the works that you have, you talked of fantasy and World War II right now. And so Battle Group obviously being that, and then Warhammer on the other end. Nobody's asked for anything like, hey, I'd really love to play this early war in a different rule set or something like that, and that hasn't been discussed.
I mean, we went through a lot of different World War II rule sets, as we mentioned. And we, must be 10. We had rules, people come and give us demo games. We used, the Two Fat Lardies, and Richard came from Two Fat Lardies to take us through rules. We did a lot of rules, so bought a lot of rules to test them. But the battle group ones, and Rob's played it, there's 5 players aside, and we limit the number of players. We don't cram as many in to make money. We have a limit of 10 or 12 maximum, usually 10 is nice. but we can go to 12. And I've lost my train of thought now. Yeah, the rule sets. Although you're playing typically against one opponent, as Rob will testify, the opponent next to you is also shooting at you during the game. And the battle group rule set we use actually works, even though you've got 4 or 5 different games going on simultaneously. They all actually work by interacting with each other as well. It's just one of the things that just work for us. And everybody who starts playing it is like, you see somebody, zoom up with a company of Panzer IIIs, and they go, yeah, I'm going to take this objective, and then suddenly from their flank, excuse me.
That's
come on.
for the.
Sorry, that's my wife let me know she just arrived in the Bahamas.
For the listener out there, that's the Panzer IIIs rolling up with ice cream truck music.
It's very envious. My wife works for British Airways, and she's in the Bahamas at the moment.
Oh, tough job.
Yeah. Anyhow, but you drive your Panzer IIIs up, and then suddenly the player to your right, the opponent to your right, who you haven't paid any attention to like normal, suddenly is shooting you in the flank. Yep. You go, what? And it's a game changer, because most people play in a 2 to 3 hour game on an evening 6x4 table. They focus on the one player.
Yep.
Suddenly,
it's tunnel vision.
Yeah, exactly. Suddenly they've got this player, and if you haven't got, if you've got a player on the other side, you've got another player on the other side, and you're giving it, whoa. So you might be able to push forward and gain the advantage, but your colleagues on your flanks are being pressured. So you've now got to coordinate with your other players to make sure you all advance, so you can't just push forward on your own. You've got to have a coordinated all arms and all players, moving in the same way, and it just brings a totally different dynamic to the game.
I think that's the best thing about the big war game too, with playing with people. Is it's so much more realistic when you're talking about your left and right flank units, and then kind of coordinating and doing those things. I want to kick it to Derek or Rob, to talk about your experiences, or Derek, kind of anything that you've seen else too from these big games with the venues.
Yeah. I think the only thing I would kind of add to that is what you said before, Matthew, about having GMs or having people guiding the game, because we've got to keep the game going for a whole weekend. It takes a lot of effort to try and build the lists correctly, doesn't it, Andrew?
Oh yes.
To get those lists correct so they last the whole weekend, and you're not running out of troops and you've lost everything by morning of day one. So it takes a lot of effort to try and keep that game going. But also, from our perspective, we can actually introduce little surprises, shall we say, for the players, things that unexpected, to help them either elongate that game if they look as though they're throwing things away, or if we want to just throw a tack on the road, just to introduce something a little bit different, and that's another big aspect of the game when we do hosted games.
Yeah, and I have to add on to that, because that was, I think, what really helped the experience for me playing is I had never played Battle Group before. I'm an experienced wargamer, but this was not a set of rules. But I walked in, and they've got quick reference sheets on the wall, like all the way around on the wall. They give you sheets, and they're there. But having 2 GMs running the game, you're able to do things like timed artillery, and like, hey, I want artillery to come at this, and they'll keep track, and they'll, hey guys, pause the game. Guess what's coming in? Rounds are hitting. Well, nobody was there because you thought they would be, and they weren't. But those kind of things are really hard to do a big game without a GM. So that was something that, even if Kentucky and I were to run a big game, just the two of us, we wouldn't be able to do all of that because we don't have a third party there kind of overseeing it.
So, and on that note, Rob, is like when you mentioned about the artillery coming in, even in Battle Group, we've taken Battle Group and we've made some amendments to it. So just for the big battles, and we actually, those familiar with Battle Group, you have a bag of tokens, and as you draw the tokens out for certain events, your morale goes worse and worse. And if you hit your morale, you break. we've introduced theatre-specific tokens.
Oh, I love it.
So, for example, with the British one, we have the Natty wagon, which is a wagon that comes and gives you tea and biscuits and hot chocolate and stuff like that. And it's like, what's the American version? What's it called? You've got a shop you go to in the forces.
In modern times, it's called the gut truck, and it's when you're on a range or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Same thing.
Yeah.
A truck goes up with.
Yeah. But if it's cold and raining and you can get a cup of tea out or a coffee, it sort of gives you a boost. So we have that arrive for the British. But if the British draw it, it's a boost in morale. But if the Germans draw the chit, then they've destroyed the wagon and it's a downer for the British. But the Germans have something called the Wurst wagon. But they ever say, but like the battle's in France, so we have a cache of French wine and cheese.
Yeah, I remember that one getting drawn.
You get that one? Yeah, so if you get the French wine, you can play it on an opponent, and they become drunk, and they become pinned. So it's sort of like, they've drunk all the wine and become a bit too drunk. So we have a little bit of fun, but we also have things that affect the game throughout. But on the artillery, in most games, it's like nominate when your artillery is going to arrive, which turn it's going to arrive on. If you're playing on a 6x4 table, you can measure the table and go 8 inches, 12 inches. I'm going to be in the middle on turn 3, turn 4. You can work out where artillery is going to go. We actually play by the real clock. So we ask people to say, look at the clock on the wall and tell me what time you want your artillery barrage to arrive and where. And
if I'm the German player, I'm just slow playing. Hold on, I got to measure that again.
Yeah. So if it says 11 o'clock, 11 a.m., at 11 a.m., no matter whose turn it is, the GM walks up and goes, boom, artillery barrage. Yep. And the number of times it's been, blue on blue fire, it's been incredible. It's one of those things. Rob's laughing because it's such a dynamic change from playing on a 6x4 table. Suddenly, the game we refer to at the moment is played on a 24 foot by 18 table. There's walkways between, of course, but 24 by 18 foot, that's a lot of space to play on. So.
No, it's and I've seen the pictures of it. It's Rob posted them in our group and stuff. It's just your guys' miniatures, the terrain, everything is just top notch. So it's awesome.
That was great.
Thank you.
Anything else for any caveats to that? I know that kind of a follow-up question in there is kind of what's the best seller, and it has to be just based on quantity and what you guys have said about time. It's got to be, hey, renting a table, right? The average Joe, Jane that walks off the street is going to rent a table, so that makes sense. But there's other questions that we're going to pull out here. I'll let Windhurst go into the next question, but there's other questions where we're going to tease out some of the other dynamics of this having a War Games venue kind of.
So you've alluded to this a little bit, but like you said, you're there, Monday to Sunday. But a typical week for big battles, what does that look like? I know sometimes you have tournaments going on, sometimes you've got your big event. But what's a typical week look like for you guys?
Well, let me sort of what we say there Monday to Sunday. I mean, I turn up between 9:30 and 10 in the morning. I'm not getting there early. I leave around 4:30. Derek gets there 7:30, 8, leaves around 3:30, something like that. So, and if we decide that we don't want to go in that day, we don't go in that day. You know what I mean? So we're quite flexible in our time. We may just say, not coming in tomorrow, I'm just not going, because we're not committed to anything, unless we have some table bookings. And we don't get a lot of table bookings during the week. It's mostly on the weekend, unless it's the school holidays or something. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, but on weekends, a lot of the time, if there's nothing planned or whatever, we just don't bother going in. As simple as that. We just close the doors and that's it.
Yeah, you don't really ever have any walk-ins, do you?
No, we don't have walk-ins. We ask people to book tables online. It's just that we know when the tables are booked and all that. So, but when we have weekends booked, like 2 weekends ago, we had what we call the Sunday Cake Club in. The Sunday Cake Club are a bunch of guys, and they put on big games, and they used about 8 tables in a sort of L shape to play Waterloo. So
awesome.
we had, I don't know if you've seen the picture, I posted some up, we had about 3,000 infantry on the table and about 800 cavalry and about 100 odd guns. And it was fantastic. It was absolutely fun. But they've also run a War Spanish Succession where they had a 24-foot by 6-foot table, and it was 3 layers deep of units for the entire 24-foot. And it was, it's spectacular. Absolutely spectacular.
A meat grinder.
It's fantastic. And we've had games with Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and we've had like a 32-foot by 6-foot table with 5 players aside, 8,000 points a player. The biggest one we've run is how much, Derek?
Well, we did 10,000 points per player, and then we had the auction for the other troops, which is about another 20,000 points spread between us.
So about 120,000 points worth of fantasy figures, and it was all big. If you look at some of the pictures, the models, the big models as well.
The number of troops is impressive, but with GW, I'm sure the price of all the troops that were on the table is fantastic.
One of the things you've alluded to, Matthew, is the 3D printed.
Yeah, nice.
And this goes back to a question Rob asked earlier on about the setup costs and stuff like that. Anybody who's looking at doing this now, apart from getting the venue and the cost of the venue and other things like, what a lot of people don't consider is the insurance. If you want to play a radio, you have to pay a license fee, PRS, PPS license fee. If you want to watch any online, you need a TV license, you need a broadband connection. So, there's a lot of costs there which people will not think about, but they're there. But then also, where did I go? I lost my train of thought again. The terrain you're going to buy, we bought a load of MDF buildings, and they were quite costly and time-consuming to set up. But, Rob's seen the 3D print room now. My hobby's been 3D printing for the 15 years plus. So I print a lot of our buildings and figures and tanks and vehicles, So as well, we have 2 sponsors. So this is one of the startup things you should consider. When we started up, one of the things we did was approach some really good friends of ours, Mick and Simon from First Corps Miniatures.
Mm-hmm. Love First Corps.
Yeah, First Corps?
Yep. I have some of their early Romans. They make some great models. The resin sheep thing, I have that. I still play with that in a lot of different games.
You got the resin sheep?
Yeah, they make some great stuff.
Yeah. Mick and Simon are great guys. I've known them God knows how many years now. And Derek and I went up there. We had a lovely Indian meal together. And I dropped the bombshell that me and Derek were starting big battles, and we wanted them to sponsor us, and we wanted lots and lots of World War II figures from them. And they didn't hesitate, and they stepped up, and we now use all their early war, and in fact, they sculpted stuff for us. They got stuff sculpted by the sculptors. So
I have seen new World War I stuff hit their site, or World War II stuff, early war.
Most to us.
That's what I was going to say. It's you guys are the problem. The problem.
We're the ones. So they sponsored us. They gave us loads and loads of figures, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of figures and vehicles, but also some of the Russian vehicles I actually 3D designed for them 15 years ago, and then some of the German ones they had another sculptor. But we have a license now from them to print them. So Rob can attest when we play the Russian game or the early war game.
Derek, between you and Andy, you're the loads, the pictures I've seen on the table. Derek, is your hand cramped up from painting all of these, or what's who are we doing this? Who's doing this?
Well, Andy's done all the terrain. I mean, every single bit of the terrain, apart from a hill, which I did. Well, 2 hills. The first one he pushed out because it was no good at all. The second one, I think we just about kept and he covered it and disguised it. He's done all the terrain, and I've done all the painting of the infantry and the like. So, there's been quite a bit of painting involved over the past couple of years.
There's 2 questions to follow up on this, and me and Windhurst we love demoing the game for people, and we love to kind of take time on our own models. And kind of what we talked about earlier on, when you're trying to be a Sherpa, you're trying to get more people into the hobby, and they pick up the clump like that. My first question is, have you changed your style to meet the needs of big battles? So do you feel like, okay, I know I'm going to paint 100 BEF soldiers here for this company. I'm going to speed paint these. I might go a little bit more in the bread bag or the teacups that are on the back of the packs, but with this, I'm just trying to get to the tabletop ready. That's kind of my first question. I got a follow-up to that as well. But no, the question kind of posed here to Derek and Andy now is, do you paint at still the high standard because of all the thousands of miniatures you're going to have to paint? And kind of what does that look like with getting stuff ready for the tabletop for these games that you've already heard us talk about, to the viewer and listener out there that are, upwards of 20 people, 24-foot tables? It's going to require a lot of scenery, terrain. And I've looked at the, people, please go to their site, look at their pictures, all the little add-ons in the terrain and the signs that are painted and the trees and the way the forests are laid out are just exquisite. So I think I know the answer to it already, but Derek, what are your thoughts on that? Are you painting at this 9-10 standard, or are you trying to push stuff out?
I'm painting at the best standard I possibly can. We didn't want to just slapdash figures out, so it's taken a long time to paint them all, because each side, so out of the three sides, the Russians, the Germans, and the Brits, we're talking of 10 platoons a side, plus all the support weapons. And we wanted to do it right. So I've done Waffenfarbe on the German, so I've done as much insignia as I can, and tried to keep the standard at the same standard throughout. I didn't want to just get figures on the table. And we've done quite a lot of work on making sure that the orders of battle are right. So when we put a game together, we're looking at what was available. When we do the Russian battle that we've currently got planned, you don't see T-34s on the table, but you do see lots of BT7s, BT5s. And it's that attention to detail as to what we really wanted to concentrate on, and that goes with the painting. We wanted to make sure it was consistent, so it's all based the same, it's all painted the same, they're all repaired the same.
That's my follow-up to it. Is I knew what the answer was to that, because you guys have put on some just masterful games. You're doing it right. I hope people try to mimic you. There's no plagiarism in the hobby in the States, or and other people that hopefully have the disposable income you guys do that can create this and just go out like Windhurst has just talked about how much that experience was and how just awesome it was. So the follow-up to that is, when I'm hosting a game, and let's just say it's my Punic War game with the Romans and the Carthaginians, and I set it up at a store, I set it up at a shop, we have a decent-sized table, and then I have at it. Regrettably or indubitably, one of the things that I have to do at the end of it is not everybody handles our figures with the same care and concern we do. And so bayonets, spears, terrain, what does that look like on the back end of the hobby? Like, do you guys have, in the Army, no matter what we're going on, Monday is always Motor Pool Monday, and it means get the Humvees out, check the tires, go through our PMCS list, and then you're going to be in the motor pool for a lot of hours doing that. And so, is it Monday after the gaming weekend? Is Motor Pool Monday with the World War II figures, or what does that look like as far as the repair time, the cost, stuff like that?
It depends how we feel. Sometimes we finish the game on Sunday evening, say about 4:30, wherever, 5 o'clock, whatever time it is. We have a chat about the game afterwards, how it went and all that. When all the people eventually leave, we look at the tables and go, yeah, we come in on Tuesday. So we won't even go in on Monday. We would just leave everything as it is. And we go in on Tuesday, and we slowly start putting stuff away. But, as you say, there's then the weapons are broken or something, or the gun barrel's snapped or something. We've got to go through and find all the damaged vehicles. But it's not just vehicles and figures, it's actually, terrain as well. And we actually say to people, we know stuff is going to get broke. Please treat it as you treat your own, but if you break anything, let us know. Invariably they get embarrassed for some reason, they don't. And, we go around and find trees broken, hedges ripped, lots of terrain damaged, but we'd rather know than actually go and look it up and find out, later on or whatever. Because,
Right.
and to be honest, I mean, we go around the tables and we find figures hidden in buildings that people forgot about. I mean, we had one weekend where one guy was, I mean, I can't mention his name, but he works for Gripping Beast, and he was complaining he didn't have enough anti-tank. The whole Sunday, I wish I had more anti-tank. Monday morning, when we looked at the equipment and all that, I said, he's missing, where's all his anti-tank? And we found a box, a whole platoon with all the support weapons underneath the table, and he'd been kicked a little bit too far underneath the table, and he hadn't been told about it. So he had a whole platoon with 25 mil, 2-pounders, mortars, everything he needed to take on the Germans, and it was just at the table.
Should have paid more attention in the mission brief.
Exactly.
Never leave a fallen comrade. But no, those are great questions, and we'll probably have a little bit more discussion. I'm going to kick over it back to Windhurst for the last question. I think you guys have answered a good majority of those questions kind of leading up to it, pending Windhurst's guidance. But I do want to get a discussion started, what we talked about with the onset, and I think this will be a way to fill that discussion in too with what the future. But I'll kick it to Windhurst.
Yeah, so I want to tie these last two questions in together because they're kind of they build on the same thing. But as far as like since you started until today, like what goals and strategies have changed since you started and where you're going, and then what does the future look like for big battles?
Do you want to go first, Derek?
Go for it, mate.
No, you go first if you want.
Oh, okay. Well, as far as changes, there, I don't see it changing personally. We're doing what we enjoy most, which is playing games. As far as moving things along, well, we've got some ideas about different games, perhaps, and long may it continue what we're doing now, because for me personally, it's very enjoyable. I enjoy being there. I love sitting there painting figures, and there's nothing like it when you get a game with 10 people around a table and you're kind of molding this creation, and people are taking the game off in what they think is their direction, and it's great. So I wouldn't want to change anything. I love what I'm doing, and I feel very lucky that I can do what I'm doing.
Yeah.
We talked with your comment there. We talked with Peter a lot, and Peter runs Bella Ludi, who puts on rule sets like sometimes designed at the corporate level. And so when I'm GMing, and I know me and Windhurst have talked about this, but you guys get to see it at like a zenith level, is the commanders interact, and whether they think they've been set up for failure with picking their AT. That in itself would just be so fascinating to be like, oh, this guy thinks he's Rommel here, and he's gonna spearhead, and he goes right into a bonehead trap. I mean, the stories you guys have just from the amount of heroes and reluctant heroes who turn into heroes, are dunces, people that just bolo the mission and everything. That in itself, I would pay for that experience. Hey, can I come just watch people interact? So I can't put a price on that. But no, go ahead, Andy, as well.
Miley, we got a couple of people who we know their game style, and we look at me and Derek, which is giving it. He's going to do a bob. We call him doing a bob because there's two people we know. Both are called Bob. And they're great guys, but they just go, right, Bob, you're on defense. Okay, charge. And it's no matter what you do, he only knows that way. So you have to cater for that as well, and that's great fun. But where are we going in the future? I mean, we've got our sponsors, First Call, which I've mentioned. I mean, I'm going to mention them, guys, because anybody trying to set up their own venue or something like that, they need support from some people. We're lucky in that, First Call, Mick and Simon are First Call, great guys, support us brilliantly. They've got lovely models, all the early war stuff, so they're supporting us fantastic. But also, as Rob knows, we are next door to another company, a Wargames company, our next door neighbours are a company called Blots, run by Simon and Sue, and they do all things at MDF.
Yeah.
And the guy is an absolute genius. Simon's an absolute genius in designing stuff for MDF.
Yeah.
So
Good
every
stuff.
base, every figure, and lots of other stuff around the building we have, you know, is all done by Blots for us, and they sponsor us as well. So, you know, shout out to First Core Models and Blots.
Both great companies. Blots' ancient walls are just
Yeah.
awesome.
I got 2 boxes of them just to take back with me to the States.
If I wasn't, me and Windhurst look forward to kind of gaming that we've talked about, you know, the sieges that we're going to do with our ancients and his Blots terrain. My other question is, it kind of came as an epiphany as we were talking through here, and you guys have stayed loyal to the initial cause, and like you said, you've got a personal kind of drive in it. And so one of the things, you know, to Windhurst's question is like, what will change? It reminds me of like a few TV episodes I've seen where I think The Simpsons did it, South Park did it, but the idea is that the person like had enough money that they bought a theme park, and then they one of the rides broke down one day and it was just for them. They just used the theme park for themselves, and so they were like, okay, well, you need to let like 10 people in, then we can pay a maintainer to kind of come in and maintain the park. And then, okay, now we've got to pay somebody to do ticket sales for these 10 people. And so it just increased to where, dang, I wanted this theme park all to myself. And now by the time the person ends and after they've operated everything, they're turned into a theme park. With your sponsors and everything else that's going on, and your guys' love of miniatures and everything, is that I've seen to some of the brick and mortar stores I've talked about it starts as a group in somebody's garage. And then they're like, hey, we buy so much of this stuff, or we need a place to play where my wife's not going to walk in and say like, hey, get back to mowing the yard. And so the Panzer IIIs are showing up again. But the kind of question to that is, does it lend itself for you guys even marketing other things to include, you know, we've got a carousel over here, whoever comes in the store, of First Core minis, if you want to buy some. This was the game you just played. Or we've got, you know, we need so many dice for all these 20 people. Now we got Chesek dice on the wall. Do you think that is a natural transition, or do you think is that something you're just going to try to stay away from? It's another side you don't want to mess with, or what do you think?
That's the answer. We don't want to mess. I mean, you know, we've had Games Workshop. They've sent us, you know, packs of stuff to look at, you know, to pick up bricks and mortar. And every month or so, I get a phone call from directors about people asking what they can buy, you know, where are we? But once you start diversifying into doing mail order and stuff like that, which is what you'd have to do, because if you, in the UK, if you start converting some of your floor space to, you know, selling goods, the rates, the business rates you pay for that floor space become astronomical, and it becomes very unviable for us as a small hobby business. So you become a mail order company, so then suddenly you have to be very competitive on price to be in the mail order business. So you have to sell Games Workshop, you have to take a hit on the margin, you're making a sliver, your life is overtaken by it, and it, you know, Derek, correct me, but it'd just be a distraction for us.
Absolutely.
So our view is we don't want to sell anything. You know, we don't even sell, you know, the movement markers or the trays or whatever from Blots. We just say, go and knock next door and talk to them. We don't want to take any, you know, the amount of money we would make off a resell or something like that is negligible compared to the time we'd have to invest. As Derek says, we'd rather paint the figures. You know, I produced the other day a load of buildings, you know, 6 mil, which Derek is ploughing through at the moment for our North Hard games. I've just done a load of 28 mil Napoleonic from a Kickstarter buildings and World War II buildings for our gamers to use, basically. So we'd rather focus our time expanding the terrain and figures. You know, for example, you know, we have the early war Germans and Brits and all that. Unfortunately, First Corps don't do the French, but we will be doing a company of French in one of our games later this year. We're just going to add one of the commands is going to be a French command, you know, with the French tanks and all that. Like, so just to give a little bit of difference and variety to the game, you know.
Excellent. No, that definitely seems like it. And just yeah, I know you had some more to talk there about kind of what is the future holds, and this is where I'll harken back to Kadesh. You know, what does the future hold for big battles? To double down on Windhurst's comment.
I mean, the biggest issue is not producing figures. You know, I've just done for my personal collection hundreds and hundreds of Napoleonics figures from Kickstarters, just bolstering my French battalions out. You know, producing them isn't a problem. Painting them is the biggest problem. Painted figures is the slow. Derek,
look at Derek's face. Yeah,
Derek paints the figures because you know, he says, you know, he paints to the best of his ability. He says we'll go slapdash. I'm slapdash. I'm not a great painter of figures, so I just can't see the darn things. But you know, I was lucky. One of the guys from our club taught us how to use an airbrush, and I've become a bit better at using an airbrush. So I'm able to use an airbrush and do lots of the buildings and the vehicles with an airbrush. So that really speeds up things for us. But I mean, the quality of figures is important. So we just want to keep going down that route. We are going to do other things like, you know, we do the fantasy games, the big fantasy game, but people bring their figures in. We're looking at doing that maybe in June on Father's Day, Napoleonics Day, 15th of June, if it rings a bell with anybody.
Yep.
Do a Napoleonic Day on the 15th of June, bring a division in or a brigade in, wherever you've got. Run a big game like that. But, you know, ECW is one of our loves. The problem is getting the right figures for ECW. The cheapest way for us, you know, is through either a sponsorship or through 3D printing. But then it's, you know, if you think probably need a couple of thousand figures, just imagine how long that takes to paint. You know, it's scary. Yeah. You know, and that's what, you know, Derek and I mainly do throughout the winter months is paint figures basically and vehicles. Terrain.
Well, it sounds like you guys might be ECW rules authors too by the time that project.
Oh, we're a long way from that. Long way.
But no, I have one kind of final question, but any follow-ups from that, Windhurst, I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah. So, just a kind of a clarification follow-up to Kentuckian's question. So you're doing World War II is the events that you put on, where it's your stuff. Are you looking to do any periods outside of World War II in the future? Is there like another period that you're like, okay, we really want to build out a collection to host these big weekend events?
As Andy said, I'd love to do ECW. You know, it's been in the Cotswolds. You know, there's lots of activity that was happening around there. So to try and do something which you could tie in with the history of that period would be fantastic. We both play a lot of Ancients, but it's getting access to these figures and painting it in the numbers that you'd really, really want to put on the table. Mm-hmm. Because when we talk about big battles, you know, that's what it's all about. Big battles. You need lots of toys. And lots of toys don't materialise ready painted in your hands overnight.
I mean,
unfortunately,
one of the things I've been looking at, because there's a lot of 3D companies out there who have done really nice biblical figures. The Kadesh figures are done. There's Persians, there's classical Indians, you know, Scrofa miniatures and things like that. Some really nice figures. You know, I was looking at, you know, Porus Alexander. I've got a fairly large classical Indian army. There's classical Indian figures. There's no decent Macedonian. Only 3D Breed does them, and they're 15mm figures scaled up to 28, which just don't work. They don't look right. So trying to find figures. So I have been doing over the last couple of weeks, to be honest, a lot of digging deep into biblical battles. Thankfully, there's very little information on the army compositions. So, but if you think like, you know, Assyria, Babylon, Assyria fought the Hittites, blah, blah, you can look at those battles and go, okay, how many chariots do I need on a table? You know, I got 20 Assyrian chariots. I probably need 100, 5 players aside, 100 Assyrian chariots would look reasonable. If I do classical Indian, I probably need 50 or 60 elephants. I have about 10 at the moment. So, things like elephants are great. 3 or 4 figures, crew, paint the elephant. It's not going to take you a long time to paint. But, 3D print them, no problem. But it's then the hundreds of infantry behind them that take a long time to print, even though they're flesh and tunic. It's a long time to paint. So people, turn up and they want to play with lots of toy soldiers, and if you have 5 players aside, which is, I think, a very nice number, you need quite a few figures per player because, as we've sort of touched on before, you don't know their playing style a lot of the time. Have you got reserves they can bring on? Are you going to just play up to a certain point, then reset the game, then bring on? It takes a lot of effort to try and work out how many figures you need versus how long you're going to play. If it's a weekend game, is it 2 games in one as such, or to make it look like one big game? You have to look at it, thing like on the World War II games we play for 2 days. At the end of day 1, we reset the defensive and attack lines, but all destroyed vehicles are left on the table. So we can't take them off and redeploy as reserves. We leave them on there because the visual impact is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of thought, go into it, and anybody trying to set up needs to think about, just because you play this way doesn't mean everybody else will. You've got to think about how many units you need, what you need in reserve. If you're going to try and reenact a battle, how far you could go down. Like we did Gettysburg the other day, Rob. We did day 1, and then day 2 was completely different.
Yeah.
So there's different ways, that you can do things, and it's really hard to get the balance right.
Well, especially with the people dynamic, right? When you add more people, to your point, like you said, I do agree that would take, and the things that you guys do and being, well versed in the rule set that you're playing, and then the, you call it play testing, or some of the early games you've held, where you're having to GM Bob, and you're like, Bob, your tanks aren't going to do well over here against all these anti-tank guns, maybe pull back. And so you've kind of designed it, I'm sure, to do that. And in every game, you have more AAR lessons learned. One of kind of my last follow-ups, because you guys have just been amazing the time on here, and the idea behind it, this is something that I just think is so cool, and it's so unique in the big battles idea, Freeth with Wargames Holiday Center and those things in Europe and England. We see them, they have the real call there. I just don't know, some kind of very 30,000 foot view thoughts about applying this to the States is we're so dispersed. It's the same idea between us and Salute and our Historicon is we go to shows to game because we don't live in proximity, and you have the advantage of being there on the island, but there's a Wargames either, I don't know the name of it, but Mount Wilkerson in France runs, I think, one similar to you guys.
Yes.
And so, like, you've got a closer, tight-knit proximity to each other, so you have people that are more, it's kind of a viable, and maybe this would work in bigger cities, but venue space would probably be at a premium then. And so it's, I do not know. Do you have any thoughts, or if there anybody that you've talked to from the States on anything like this, other than those, I think, generic ideas on why this probably would have some pretty big barriers to it that you guys might not have in either England or Europe?
I think one thing that springs to my mind, Matthew, is the fact that over here, as Andy said at the beginning, we don't have massive space in our homes. So a garage is enough for a car, and our cars aren't as large as the American ones. Whereas in America, you seem to have a lot more space. So when you want to put on a table, if you want to put a table up which is 14 foot long, whatever, wherever the size allows, we haven't got that ability. So what we're doing is giving us that ability to play big games. Whereas I think in America you probably have got that space to enable you to do that certainly more easily than we can.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, I used to live in South Carolina in Greenville, and my house lovely house, had a massive area. I could, convert it into a gaming room if I wanted to, put a nice 15, 20-foot table in. So it's there, but I think you hit the nail on the head. You guys, there's 380 million now in America, something like that, whatever it is. 80% live within 100 miles of the coast, but you've got two massive coastlines. So, I mean, if you're in New York, 20 million people population, Los Angeles, 20-ish million, whatever it is nowadays, you've got the gravitas where you can actually set up a facility on the outskirts and people will travel to it, and you've got the people who play within that area. So a weekend away isn't a flight. It's a 2, 3, 4 hour drive. And in America, 2, 3, 4 hour drive is not a lot. In the UK, Rob's laughing. He knows. He's driven our roads. You know what I mean? You only go 50 miles, it's taking you an hour and a half. You go, what? They're all single lane roads and things like this, and country roads. So we are small. That's what helps. Traveling to us isn't that onerous. Nobody has to fly anywhere. Typically in the UK, you can drive most places. Unless you go from the south to Scotland, then you probably want to fly. But in the US, because you are dispersed, as you said, Matthew, I think it's an issue unless you're in one of the denser population areas, unless you're in New York, LA, Chicago, Philly, maybe. Chicago's got a gaming, New York's love gamers. All the big cities love big gaming things. But if there's a lot of stores with attached tables to bring in the punters, it's going to be hard for anybody to succeed unless.
I think that's what, when we talk to the wargaming clubs throughout the U.S., we had one of our last episodes was on that, and it's like cabbaged off the idea. I would say there's a few things competing against why it wouldn't work, and the one is we have a bunch of conventions and they're regional and they're almost opposite to your conventions because people go to our cons to play games. It's not just demos and see that's like that's where you get vendors. Big games happening. Yeah, and vendors. But that's where you get the 10, 15 foot, 16 foot tables. But I also think that the idea that if you're getting that in a regional basis like 3 or 4 times a year, then you probably don't see the need for it. And then also the displacement is just huge. But man, there is nothing like, and I've only done it a few times in my life in the United States, and it's either like family or there's some direct relationship of playing a big weekend game on a 20-footer or something like that. And you just can't, to get that experience and the taste of a player is just awesome because there's so much more that you experience. Like you said, the flanks, of the game are just so crucial to now, you turn into the Persians at Gaugamela and you got this big gap and you're like, oh God, what's that? I shouldn't have moved my Panzer IIIs up, or there's something like that. And it's just I wish something like that, and my talk about the clubs is the Hawks up in, the Northeast there. They rent out they game at a club and you pay the percentage, and they rent out like a church or something like that. And so they're doing that once a month and they're getting their experience games, but they have other members going on. So there's some ways I think people do it to some degree, but it's under the guise of something else. It's not two proprietors like yourself saying, man, we just want bigger stuff. And if you want to come along for the ride, 20 quid a table, man, you come and game with us and we'll get it. And so I really look forward to what you guys do, on that. I'll kick it back to Rob for any alibis, any other questions if you have anything.
No, I don't have any final questions. I'm just really thankful that we could get you guys on because I've loved being able to come up and use your space. And I was blown away when I saw it. And, as I was coming into the country, first thing I'm doing is I'm looking for places, brick and mortar stores. And I was like, oh, wait, if this pops up as a war game, big battles. And, what is it? And I think I came up just to see it one weekend when you're open. I was like, wow, it's just tables. And look at all the terrain and everything. And you guys I don't think you guys had quite finished all your terrain inserts yet when I came up. And I was like, I've never heard of something like this before. This is this is amazing. Because I think I was even telling you all, like the closest I've ever seen in the States is you'll have some stores that might be like 1/3 retail and 2/3 table space. But that's about it. But you're still, like Kentucky was saying, you're not going to be able. They're not really conducive for putting a bunch of big tables together, more than maybe 2 or 3 tables at most, just because it's not economical for them.
There's a place down south. What was it called, Eric? I can't remember. That moved, and he basically rented the tables. That similar thing, where it was individual tables, and then it became to buy stuff, and then the food was done, because that's where you make money on food and all that. So as soon as people start going down, selling stuff on site and doing food and everything, it's a rocky road in our view. It sort of dilutes what we want to achieve. So that's why we're staying away from it. But when you brought your kids in to play, that's awesome. Like, that's exactly what we love to see. Some gamer coming along with their children and just playing on the tabletop. You could have played at home quite easily, but to take them to the venue just with the other people, it's so nice for us to see, young kids come along and play and all that. It's really nice. And that's what we do. We're just trying to make sure that we can offer somewhere that people play and just enjoy themselves. This is what we do, and we just megalomaniacs in collecting figures, and we just like to put lots and lots of figures on the table. So
that's you guys, again, thank you so much. What we want to do now is me and Windhurst haven't really come up with something for kit bag. I'm going to ask now, Windhurst. But what we do at the end of every episode, after we've had such a great conversation with you guys, is we talk about kind of anything in your kit bag or anything that you guys have done throughout the years or that's in the hobby right now, or even pointed towards big battles. And, in the past, we've used the really useful boxes, battle foam bags, different types of tools. If you use a wet palette, an LED light when you're painting. Is there anything, putting you on the spot, is there anything, that you have to have in your hobby kit bag?
That might be helpful for other people.
Yeah, so
100%. I'll just say it straight away before Derek jumps in. 3D printers.
3D printers. We haven't had that one. That's a good one.
It's the 2 types. You need 2 types. One is an FDM printer, which does all your scenery, your buildings, and all that. And the bigger, the better you can afford, and the better resolution. The new Creality K1s and K2s. That's where you need to be. None of this 200 micron layers. You need to be down to 80 micron layers, and that's where the quality lies. That's brilliant for scenery. That's all I do now. 80 micron layers for my scenery. So fantastic. And then for figures and vehicles, then you need a resin printer, a good quality resin printer, and the right type of resin, which has got to be resilient. We started off with a good quality resin, but it's a bit brittle. We've now transitioned through 2 different other resins, and we're now on our 3rd resin, which is much better. We can print thin stuff. It's flexible. You can drop it. It's good. So for me, kit bag, 3D printers.
3D printers. Derek, what do you have besides a new set of hands to paint more models with?
Yeah, and better glasses, I think, to be honest. For me, wet palette has been an absolute fantastic invention, because I'm very stingy with my paints. I like to make them last as long as possible. But I would also add the airbrush, because what Andy does with the airbrush now, I'm not very good, but Andy is really good at doing the buildings and the tanks, getting the base layers on, and then I do the detail. Airbrush and wet palette for me for painting purposes.
Airbrush has 3D printing. I've normally farmed out, because the barrier to get over it with. I get somebody like Windhurst or somebody that's in it. It is. I've found it could be a hobby within itself. With 3D printing, and with the airbrush, it has a learning curve as well. I've tried to master it. I won't do German armor with it, but the way you spray the nozzle, keeping it clean. I won't say it's as intricate as a 3D printer, but I do. Those are both combat multipliers for the hobby. Like, those are both things that I would agree. The viewer or listener, I think that's spot on, especially with the wave of 3D printing. the next topic that we'll lead into is a way we close out every episode is kind of our scouting report, and it's kind of what's on the horizon. So now I'm asking your guys personal scouting reports, and so me and Windhurst kind of give ours, and that'll be hopefully a go by, and it's what's on the hobby desk, what's the next games to play, kind of what's going on. And so on the hobby desk, me and Windhurst, we work for obviously the Department of Defense, so we're moving every 2 years. We're both, his stuff's all packed up, my stuff is getting ready to go in boxes behind me. I have my Caesarian army. I looked at the Warlord, the new Pontic book that's coming out, and man, I just want to Caesarians and Phalangites clashing seems really cool, and so I need to get my Caesarians done. As I say that, as my Gauls, my gunfighters, and everything over here is shamefully looking at me on my painting desk. And then the other thing that you may or may not be able to see in the background, yeah, it's like right back here, is I'm heading back to Normandy. I had the benefit to be the 101st Airborne Division's de facto historian for the last year, and so I went to Normandy, Market Garden, and Bastogne, and got to do the battlefield tours and talk about the ground, and it was just so amazing. And then did a diorama last year for Colonel Cole's charge there in the north of Carentan, where he won the Medal of Honor, his bayonet charge in World War II. And so it was awesome to be on that ground and build a tabletop to kind of outline that. And so this year I'm going back to Carentan doing the same stuff, and I've decided to build a model of the medieval arches with some help from my friends who have 3D printers. Shout out James Napier and Scott. Scott's in Nashville and James in Louisville that are helping me. And so I'm building kind of a little bit of a 2-foot by 18-inch diorama of this very famous place where it'll be displayed. And then I'm giving the model to the city of Carentan, so it'll be there with my crappy paint job for a while.
Wow.
But no, it's been awesome. So that's what's on my kind of scouting report. I look forward to getting the move done and then getting back to painting the models. Andy, your talk on here has spurred me to be like, man, you know what? I need a Hittite army. I don't know why I need a Hittite army, but Andy's talking.
They chariots also.
Yeah. So I need to get, the Syrians need somebody to fight as well, and the Israelites and the Philistines need another army. And so my Egyptians need some more chariots. You've gotten me fired up about that. So I look forward to kind of getting to my next duty station and maybe chopping a little bit more on my ancient armies. What about you, Windhurst? What's on your scouting report?
Yeah, as you said, all my stuff is gone. They've already moved it this week before recording, so it's on its way, hopefully safe and sound, back to the States. I did keep with me a couple of games. I got the Perry's Travel Battle to try, and I actually got a game in yesterday with my youngest son, who's 7, and he was able to follow along, so that speaks well of it. And Blood Red Skies, which I had painted up the Midway set, but I have yet to play it. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to keep this aside, and it'll be one of the games I'll play while I'm traveling. But yeah, once I get settled in at my new base, I am getting back into 3D printing is my plan. I've got a printer and storage, but I think I'm due an upgrade, so I'll probably get those. But I also... My first major project back in the States is going to be my Syracuse Greek army. I've got all the models. I've got all the terrain. They just need to be put together and then start painting on them. So I've been slowly collecting it up and getting it ready.
Me and Windhurst are talking smack because I have a Republican Roman and a Carthaginian army, and he just said he's going to pick sides. He'll be able to beat up on one of them.
That's what Derek and I do all the time.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that.
Well, for me, work-wise, it's going to be the French when they've been printed, because obviously we need to get those up and running. But on a personal level, I've got if you look at my painting desk, it's got so many different types of models and whatever. But we do have a sword point competition coming up later on this year, and my New Kingdom Egyptian army needs to be completed.
Chariots.
So I've got lots of chariots to paint.
But it's scary because you can fall back on my army because I won't be using NK. So.
Yeah, Andy's sworn off tournaments against you, Derek, so he won't be there.
Oh, I never face him. I don't face him normally anyway because I'm at the bottom of the pile and he's always at the top.
That's the most fun when you show up to a table and you're like, hey man, I'm just going to buy you a beer and let's just have fun and roll dice.
You're at the top as well.
That's every tournament then.
How many New Kingdom models are going to be in that army? What's on your few hundred? That's a weekend for you, right?
I've got
Wish.
30 odd chariots, I think, which I've got, which are all foundry chariots.
Beautiful. The
I've
most
painted
beautiful period.
5 or 6 of them, and I've got 3 or 4 units of 30 odd bowmen, infantry, with sharp pointy sticks. So yeah, it's going to be, it's a good mix.
That's awesome. That's
Nice.
awesome. Andy.
Right. So, on the sort of business side, I'm putting together a specific table. It's only a 6 foot by 4 foot table, and it's for what's called the Battle of Ellendon, which was a battle that occurred in 825. And although we are based in Cirencester, I actually live near a town called Swindon, and the battle is now believed to have taken place in one of the in the grounds of one of the large country houses here called Lydiard House. So it's open to the public, and the friends of Lydiard House have asked us to put on a battle, and we are putting the diorama together. So myself, their big battles are putting the terrain together. So it's got a stream or river running down the middle with hills, and then it's going to be between the forces on there being all painted by the Swindon Wargames Club. So they're painting all the figures, we're providing the terrain, and then all the schools in October and all that will come in and learn about one of the local battles. So that's quite an interesting project, actually, to go and see it, because it's going to be open to the public, and it's a bit scary, actually, putting my terrain out for the public to see as such, other than just gamers who understand that some terrain is made for gaming, and it's meant to be robust enough to game on, whereas this has got to really look the part as well. The other, on a personal side, I'm busy printing like mad Napoleonic figures to expand my Napoleonic 28mm ranges. I'm doing a few divisions that invaded Russia, French, Russian, Polish, Saxon. There's a few of them to be done. So I'm doing them, but I'm also really being enthused after playing Troy again, Battle of Troy, looking at all the different ancient armies, in particular, classical Indian and biblical armies and all that, to see what sort of battle we could look at, because biblical figures are much easier to paint than World War II, for example. So is there something we could do towards the end of the year with, a big game with a few hundred chariots on, and, a couple of thousand figures aside, something like that? So that's something I'm really looking into at the moment. Printing isn't the problem, is can we get them painted, etc.
Yeah, I'm over here crying because I'm like, oh man, I painted 400 models in a year, and Andy and Derek are talking about, we need about 2,000, to do this. Just 100 elephants, 100 chariots. It's crazy.
The vehicles and elephants aren't a problem. It's the individual figures that take the time. That's the problem.
No, we truly appreciate you guys being on here. We truly thank you for your time. It is such a, it's so rare to us with the States, and just very fortunate that Windhurst was able to come and kind of see the splendor of that venue and hear about these things. And then, we got a yank over there to experience it and kind of
It's been a pleasure having him. I tell you, he's been a good guy. So he's promoted us, he's put pictures on for us and everything. It's been really good. And follow both of you guys and all that on Facebook, and it's great to see the pictures. So I saw your pictures about what games you're keeping, and I thought, that's for the kids. And it's lovely to see, you're playing with the kids and all that. So
any last comments, Windhurst, and I'll sign us off here.
No, thanks again, guys. Really appreciate it.
No, truly, thanks so much. Derek, I hope your hand feels better for all the painting that you have ahead of you. Andy, doing an awesome job. I look forward to all the prints and, again, the first core models. To the viewer and listener, please check these guys out. They're up on Facebook all the time. If you're in England at all, or hopping over there and somewhere not in the South where all the pompous ivory tower people live. No, I'm kidding. I'm joking. But give them a look. They're doing amazing things, and with all the venue that it has, this was just such an interesting conversation that I think a good pool of our listeners kind of have no understanding of, with how that makes it and how you're able to do that. And you guys make it pop as well as you do. So truly appreciate it. Thanks again, once to the bottom of our hearts.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
everybody who listened and viewed, please give us comments on your thoughts about big battles, the venue kind of wargaming space and marketing in it, and what if you've ever gamed at one before, if you've been a patron of big battles, please share your thoughts on there in comments. And then without further ado, we truly appreciated you joining us on this episode of On Patrol. Please grab your sword, your shield, your spear, your belt-fed machine gun, and join us on the next episode of On Patrol. The Fighting Kentuckian, over and out.